So I might sound slightly hoarse tonight because I came from not a very loud bar, not a big party, but a elementary school children's dance.
Oh,
elementary school dance? Is that a thing?
The earliest I can recall having a dance was 6th grade.
Yeah.
Yeah, same.
But yeah, so that's apparently a thing here. And I can say that I am exactly as comfortable here as I was in 6th grade at my 6th grade dance. That whatever that is in a person that makes them, maybe incompatible with that kind of social situation, that does not change when you are 40. Whatever you were when you were, how old are you in 6th grade? Like 11, 12? Whatever age you were then, it's the same when you're 40. That does not leave a person.
What about your kid? Did Adam inherit your dance incompatibility?
Fortunately, he seems to have taken after his mother in that way, which is of huge benefit. Mm-hmm. It's like I couldn't wait to get home, and it's funny, like, it doesn't feel this way because we're all staring at computers in like our offices and our houses, and no one's around. But in a way, we are talking to 80,000 people, and so it's weird to think like I'd rather talk about computers to a football stadium full of strangers mostly. Which most people would consider a terribly scary thing, but I'd rather do that than try to dance in front of 40 children and their parents, at an elementary school.
Wait a second. Why are you doing any dancing at this? I thought you were just the vibe is awkward and it felt like a place that you didn't want to hang out. But isn't it the kids supposed to be dancing? Aren't you just like a chaperone? Like, aren't you just standing against the wall?
Basically, except that there's some parents who are like the fun parents, and they're like dancing a little bit.
No, that's not fun.
Yeah, well, tell me, but yeah, there is.
I'm saying it's not fun for the kids. Who wants their parents to?
Well, the good news is this is an elementary school. The oldest anyone is here is 5th grade. Mm-hmm. And so no one is actually old enough to really be like awkward about, girls and boys and cooties and stuff. So the good thing is that there wasn't any of that really. So the kids are just like running around, like lunatics. Like they're just running and throwing balloons at each other.
Did Adam enjoy it?
Yes. And that's what mattered.
And did Tiff just not go?
No, she was there too.
Oh, she like it?
She is dance compatible, and so she has a much easier time.
Right. Yeah. I am not. I am also not dance compatible. That is not my thing. I perhaps with the appropriate amount of social lubricant, maybe a teeny bit, but no, not generally speaking. That is not for me. However, I don't think being the cool parent is always bad. So, I don't remember if I mentioned on the show, but we joined a little community pool this past summer, and it was really, really great for our family. We got to meet some new friends, get closer with some old friends, etc. And early on in the summer, I decided I was going to not do the normal Casey thing of just sitting on the sidelines and being like, yeah, have fun, kids. I'll see you later. And instead, I was going to try to be the cool pool dad that will get in there and roughhouse with all the kids and whatnot. And even though sometimes my back looked like it had been attacked by a bunch of feral kittens, because that's effectively what was going on, generally speaking, I thought being the fun, cool pool dad was enjoyable. But that doesn't require any sort of coordination at all, unlike being the fun, cool dance dad, which requires coordination and rhythm, two things I have none of.
See, that's the thing. I'm very coordinated, and I have really good rhythm, and yet I still cannot dance to save my life, because I think it's more, it's more of a mindset. It's more mental, I think, and whatever the mindset is that requires a person to be able to like let go of their inhibitions and just dance their hearts out, and like I don't have that necessarily, or I have trouble shifting my brain into that mode. And no matter how much social lubricant one has, which of course at an elementary school dance is none, but even if that were there, like in situations where that is available, that doesn't help me. I still cannot become a dancer for whatever reason. So it's just I can do a lot of things. That's not on the list, and I've learned to live with it. I've learned to cope with this lack of my personality that I have here, and I try to make up for it in other ways as best as I can.
Well, the good news is I don't think you're going to be going to too many more dances as your kid gets older.
I sure
that's true.
Yeah, I sure hope not. The good thing is I was able to use my skills in a much better way last night. my kid brought home. He had a school project. They're working on. They're making public service announcements as part of their unit on making persuasive essays. So he like wrote a script basically, and it had to be a 90-second recording. And I'm like, oh man, dude, I got this for like I got your back on this. Like, so everyone else is going to show up with like their voice memos thing. I had him use my good mic because he wanted to. I was like, of course you can. Mm-hmm. And then he recorded 90 seconds max. And the take, he was really happy with the take, but it was like 15 seconds over. And I was like, well, look, I record 3 2-minute segments a week for this show. I know what you're doing, and trust me, the easiest thing to do is just re-record it and just go a little faster. Maybe cut a sentence out here or there if you can.
Why don't you use Smart Speed?
I thought about that, but I kind of did. And so he said, can't you just edit it to be shorter? Mm-hmm. And I was like, let's try. What the heck? Let's try it. And so we like shortened the silences and took out like one repeated word that was in the middle there, and
I got to go 1.1 times.
Yeah, like took out a couple of like breaths here and there that didn't necessarily need to be there to sound natural. And I showed them like, oh, if it cut here, it doesn't sound natural. If you cut over here, it does. And 90-second limit. The time clock at the end said 129.996, and we were like, done.
Oh my word.
And of course it sounds amazing because he's like, on my podcast mic. So I'm like, that I can't dance to save my life, but that I can really help you out, son.
I don't think he's going to be great on audio quality though.
Let's do some follow-up because we have a lot of audio quality things to talk about, coincidentally. And we have some HomePod 2 follow-up and a teaser, spoiler even. Marco has his HomePod 2 review coming later in the episode after follow-up. But before we get there, we have HomePod 2 follow-up.
This is like when you're watching TV growing up and it's like, the story you all came here for, news at 11. And then eventually you get to 11 o'clock and they don't get to it until like the last 10 seconds of the half-hour segment. It's after the next commercial. After the next commercial, you'll see when we come back, you'll hear all about this crazy thing you wanted to hear about. Fortunately, I have way more to say about it than those old news shows, and we won't make you wait until 11:29.
Hopefully not, anyway. All right, so HomePod 2 series speed test done on video by Stephen Robles, who is also known as the Bearded Teacher. First of all, kudos to this unbelievably handsome gentleman for wearing a gorgeous shirt during the recording of this video. I am deeply impressed with his choice of wardrobe. But even with that said, the video was legitimately really good. And so Stephen talks through, somehow he has like 17 different Sonos setups, including the setup that I have in my living room, with the exception of no rears, or he didn't mention those anyway. But he tests that against the HomePod 2 stereo pair and makes some very interesting but reasonable conclusions about, what would he advise one to buy, depending on what you're looking at. If you're really more of a TV person, then you might want to go this route. If you're more of a music person, you might want to go this other route. It was a really good video. I think it was like 15-ish minutes. Yeah, 14 minutes, 38 seconds. And it's worth it. You should definitely check it out.
The reason I put this in here is because last week I complained that all the YouTube reviews I'd watched, nobody actually tested how the new system on a chip affected the response speed of Siri, which seems like a pretty important part of a product that mostly hasn't changed. But one thing that did change in it was the SoC, and the old one was slow, so you should test that. And then that's how I got sent this video. I said, somebody did test the speed of Siri on the new HomePods. And you know who did it? Somebody wearing, as Casey was alluding to before, an ATP M1 Ultra shirt. Because he knows what's up.
Definitely knows what's up. Do we want to cover this related askatp that we were originally going to cover next week, but I think it kind of slides nicely right in here. Is that allowed, John, or do I need to wait until next week for this?
Yeah, I think I put that there.
No, I did.
All right. Well, anyway, yes, now's a fine time to cover it.
So Justin Saucier wrote, would a stereo pair of HomePods be a better TV setup than a soundbar? I know John will scream true surround sound in case he loves the Sonos, but purely comparing between a soundbar, Vizio to be specific. So as you expected, I cannot state enough how much I adore my Sonos setup, but I will be the first to tell you it is heinously expensive. It is incredible, but it's very expensive. And
was it more than $600 for two HomePods?
Oh, yes.
All right. So I guess I haven't priced it out, so I didn't realize.
Sonos doesn't sell a lot of products for less than $600.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Exactly. You're counting it, but you got the sub with it too, right? And
that's correct.
And the back surrounds too, or no?
That is also correct. So,
Okay, yeah, that's going to be a lot.
Yes, but that's actually in some ways a perfect segue, because what I was going to recommend, and I'm going to try to vamp a little bit while I'm looking up the price, is Sonos sells a set of the Sonos Arc, which, as we record, is their most high-end soundbar, which is what I got, and a Sonos sub. And there's two different subs. I got the larger of the two subs, the Sub Gen 3. And actually, as we record, coincidentally, it is $200 off. It is generally listed for $1,648. It is currently on sale for $1,448. Now, this sounds phenomenal. And I don't personally have any experience with HomePods, so I can't make any sort of claims it sounds better or worse than HomePods, but it sounds incredible. But it's also like 2.5 times the cost, 2 times the cost, or right? Then it's 2 times the cost of 2 HomePods. So it's not cheap. I think there's something to be said for if you're doing a lot of home theater viewing, you might be better off with some sort of, soundbar with sub. But, and I'm kind of spoiling Steven's video now, really, if you just want to get in the door at a semi-cheap price and get easily 80% of the way there, even for home theater stuff, even I can concede that a stereo pair of HomePod 2s might be the better answer. John, correct me on this.
Yeah, so here's the thing. So the problem with sound bars is most of them are bar shaped, so they're not that big. Some like the fancier ones have why there's a factor is because that means you can't have like speaker cones that are that big, and it's very difficult to get any decent bass out of like a 2-inch speaker cone. Like depending how short your sound bar is, that may be a limiting factor. As you get fancier and fancier sound bars, a lot of them put like the big cones facing up or down, and they're actually fairly deep if they're not that tall. The very, very fancy sound bars are not small anymore. Like they're just really big. And so you're like, oh, you can fit big drivers in there, and they do, and they have a whole bunch of them, and they're all over the place, right? But for television viewing, with that aside, the main thing that I feel like you would want in a television viewing system, it has less to do with sound quality, which you can decide how much money you want to spend to get whatever sound quality you want, and more to do with you want all the channels represented. So if I was spending my money and I was doing a television, I don't think I could ever give up the center channel, which means you can't just have a stereo pair, right? You have to have a left and a right and a center. And then you should probably also have a subwoofer. And then you can consider whether you want the back surrounds or not, right? And that is something that HomePods can't give you because you just got the two of them. And the two of them does not even give you a center channel, right? Let alone, and they have plenty of bass or whatever. Now, the thing is, if you have a cruddy soundbar, 2 HomePods will probably sound better. Even despite the fact that the cruddy soundbar has a quote-unquote center channel, soundbars are usually about the width of your TV. So you're not going to get that much stereo separation because how far can the right and left be from each other? Not much farther than the width of the soundbar. And when they do have a center channel, a very cheap soundbar will have a center channel made of these tiny little speakers that are just, right? And so in that case, you would say, 2 HomePods does sound better than this cheap soundbar. But the cheap soundbar probably costs less than 2 HomePods. So it's a little bit of a complicated question. But in general, what I would say is if you care about television and movies, don't get a 2-channel setup. Everything now has more channels than that. You want center, left, and right, and preferably some kind of surround if you can manage it, right?
And of course, as we know, like anything that was shot to be 3D capable, you should also be viewing on a 3D TV because that capability is there, you need to have that. It's always better, right?
3D TV is terrible, but surround sound is good.
Oh, really? Why is that? That's interesting. Why is that?
Because it's good. Because it sounds good. Because it's what you have in movie theaters. People like it. It sounds good. It is not annoying. It makes the movies and the television shows better.
Mm-hmm. And everything about a movie theater experience is better. So, for instance, you have to make your home smell like stale stepped-on popcorn.
That's not what we're talking about. Anyway, so even just for things that you don't care about, like forget about the word surround. Like I don't want to hear things behind me. Forget about that. Just right in front of you sound. Having a center, right, and left is better than just having right and left because the shows are mixed for center, right, and left, and they're mixed to be put out that way. So all the sound is coming from the front of you. No weird bouncing off anything. But even just in that scenario, that's how the shows are mixed. They're usually mixed with also backs around stuff too. Anyway, so the reason I give all those caveats about cruddy soundbars is it's not universal. It's not like you should always get any soundbar over any pair of HomePods because you shouldn't, because cheap soundbars do not sound good. they won't have bass, and the HomePods do have bass. A cheap soundbar will barely have any separation because the bar is not very long, and maybe the center channel is probably really cruddy quality because those usually aren't upwards or downwards facing, so they're coming right at you, right? So it's not a universal, but in general, look for discrete channels. Now, the obvious, if you're wanting to actually spend a little bit more money, Casey setup is good if you don't want to spend money on a receiver, or if, like Casey, you have an ancient receiver that can't handle this, because you don't need a receiver in that Sonos setup. It does all the stuff for you, right? But kind of like when you go sort of the top end of, used to be Macs, but these days PCs, a modular system where you buy a receiver and then you buy speakers, and then that's all modular, and you can mix and match. I can pick a receiver based on capabilities. I can pick speakers of sizes and shapes and costs to fit my setup. I can change those speakers over time. I can swap out the receiver and keep the speakers the same. A modular system is going to cost more, but it gives you the ultimate flexibility of deciding exactly how much money you want to spend for how big a speaker for which role. And any modern receiver has more channels than, there's enough channels to fill your entire room, depending on where you can put speakers or where you can't. So that's how I feel about HomePods as TV speakers. They're probably better than your cheap soundbar. They're way better than what's built into your television. But if it's possible for you to get discrete channels for your sound, that's what I would suggest.
I agree with you, but for slightly different reasons, of course. The functionality of sending the audio back to the Apple TV via eARC, and then that wirelessly sending it to the HomePods over some kind of protocol, that's going to introduce, obviously, a few problems. Number one is going to be there's going to be some latency. And I have not tried this setup yet, but I've heard the latency is okay, but it's always going to be there. It's always going to be like, a little bit worse than other speakers. And that might be okay for like movies and TV because you can adjust, delays here and there. It's not going to be okay for anything that you need to be low latency in real time, like for instance games. Like if you have a game system connected to your TV, you're not going to want any additional latency added by the audio, and so that's going to be a problem. Number two, it's just going to be more complicated and potentially buggier. This is the ability to be used as TV speakers is not the main role and selling point and focus of the HomePod as a product. And so maybe you can do it, but if that's what you're shopping for, you should probably go a different direction to something that's actually made more for that purpose, because your life will probably be simpler and better and more reliable in the long run. Like, for instance, if you wanted to buy a computer to primarily play video games on, that can be a Mac. You can buy a Mac, and Macs can run games. Like that's a thing that can happen, but you're better off buying a gaming PC. So John. So like you can do it with the Mac, but that's not really what it's made for. The HomePod that's never going to be like a main priority for them. It's never going to get like all the testing in the world. It's never going to have all the capability in the world. Down the road, a software update might break it in weird ways, and maybe your TV speakers will be broken for a month while they fixed it. Like you don't want to be in that world. If you're buying specifically to be used as TV speakers, get regular TV speakers. Now, whether that's a soundbar, which I still hate that entire product category and term and everything. See, soundbars, the same way that like when Steve Jobs was first talking about apps in the App Store, and he kind of talked about them almost like diminutively, like, oh, they're just apps. Oh, just snack on these apps. It was like he the way he was speaking about them didn't show a lot of respect for them or reverence to them. It was more just like, here's these little things that kind of don't matter. Here, snack on them. Good luck with that. That's what soundbars are to the entire world of home theater audio. It's like, oh, we'll just give you a little soundbar. Yeah, here, have a soundbar.
There are high-end soundbars now, believe it or not.
Yes,
they are very expensive, and they are actually pretty good. Like I said, they are actually pretty good because they're really, really wide, so you actually get stereo separation, and they're big, so they have large speaker drivers in them. So what they are essentially is speakers, enough of the guts of a receiver to make them work, all shoved in one thing. So it's not, most of them, I agree, most of them are not great, but there are actual ones, if you spend a ton of money and you have limited space, that are fairly impressive.
Soundbars are the point-and-shoot camera of the home theater audio world. So you have the built-in speakers on the TV that you get for free with no space, and they do kind of remarkable things considering the limited space and front-facing grills and stuff that they tend to be lacking. Like, so you have the built-in speakers on the TV. Then you have this huge quality gap, And then you have like a nice speaker system where whether it's 2-channel, 3-channel, 5-channel, 19-channel, whatever it is, you have like there's that big gap in size, complexity, cost, between TV speakers and then a full-blown separated speaker system with a receiver. Soundbars try to be in the middle of that, but they have a very hard time. Most soundbars are not that much better than the built-in speakers of your TV, and also are way, way worse than a big system. And so if you can do the big system, and it doesn't have to be a high-end big system, it just gets bigger. You have to have generally some kind of receiver or amp, and then you have to buy separate speakers, and even though I'm a 2-channel or 2.1 person, I love having a subwoofer and the 2 speakers. That's a great system for me. I know John espouses at least having a center channel, and I can see the reasons for that. It's kind of a preference thing, and so I see that both ways. And again, John was right. With HomePods, like you can't expand that system, whereas with anything else you can. But what everybody will tell you, all the people who are soundbar apologists, they'll tell you, oh yeah, get the soundbar, it's okay. But if you really want the best setup, also get front, left, and right separate speakers and rears and a subwoofer. Well, if you're doing that, then all the soundbar is an extraordinarily expensive, crappy center channel with an amp in it. And you're better off separating out those roles.
I don't think they'll tell you to get right and lefts with a soundbar.
Yeah, no, I think you've jumped off the ship at this point. I mean, I understand the point you're making, and I agree wholeheartedly, by the way, that your average soundbar, from everything I've experienced, sounds like garbage. I completely.
Although
agree
I still think
that.
it sounds way better than most TV speakers. Like
Well,
there is a jump between
pretty low bar.
TV speakers and even the worst soundbar.
That's true, but that's a very, very low bar.
Honestly, not for many people. Like it turns out, like, I mean, look, obviously, everyone is picky about different things, but like for most people's needs, a soundbar isn't that much better than the built-in speakers on most decent TVs. Now, that's a lot of mosts. There's a lot of qualifying words there. I know that. But for the most part, soundbars usually do not pull off what they purport to pull off. What they purport is this is going to be a relatively small-ish, relatively simple-ish thing that's going to be way better. And of course they play all the same tricks as like HomePods. It's like, oh, you can just have this one thing in the middle and we'll bounce sound off the walls, and none of that really works very well. And you can always tell, oh, this is all coming from the middle. Like it's not fooling anybody. You can't beat physics. But what people think they are good at, they're not that good at.
I don't know. I think it's one of those things where if you are willing to spend the money for like John has been saying, a properly good soundbar, then it can be done well. Although I will say even the Arc, which is the most fancy soundbar that Sonos makes, it is pretty tinny without an attachment.
And it is not. That is not an example of a high-end soundbar, by the way.
Okay. Well, then what would you...
Like, the fancy ones are substantially more expensive than the Sonos Arc and substantially larger, and usually do come with a subwoofer. They're not cheating. They just have tons of speaker drivers widely separated with high quality and the built-in guts to amplify them and make them sound good. And they have some smarts to make the aiming them around the room. Like, the bouncing is never going to make it sound like it's coming from behind you, but the very best ones sound like they're on the side of you, which is much better than only being in the front.
We are brought to you this week by Drafts. I gotta say, I'm really happy to have this app sponsoring us because Drafts is, I think, one of the best apps for iOS. It's just amazing. So, Drafts, this is more than just another notes app. It gives you a new approach to entirely how you use your iPhone, iPad, Mac, or Apple Watch. Drafts starts as a low-friction way to capture your thoughts. Super easy. You just launch it and start entering your text. No more fumbling around to find the right app or the right folder to create a note, only to find out, later on you forgot where you were doing it or you lost your train of thought or whatever. Drafts is optimized for fast capture. You just open it up, boom, start typing. And then once you've captured your text, Drafts' customizable editor gives you a familiar place to hone your thoughts. They have great markdown support, tools for arranging lines, and of course your choice of fonts, sizes, and other editing options, so you can really make Drafts your go-to scratchpad for everything from journals and checklists to even drafting emails. And when you're ready to do something with your text, Drafts' powerful actions are there for you, and you can do pretty much everything everything under the sun. Send emails, messages, post to social media, including great Mastodon support already. And Drafts integrates with hundreds of popular apps and services, making it easy to fit into any workflow. You can also extend Drafts yourself with ready-to-use actions from the Drafts directory. You can build your own. They have extensive community forums to find help and a huge user guide, huge directory. There's a huge community around this app, so you can really fit it into your workflow. The possibilities are endless with Drafts. Drafts is always free to use, so download it today. Try it in your dock for a week. You will find you can't live without it. So you want more out of Drafts? You can unlock the power features, things like themes, workspaces, and custom actions, and more with Drafts Pro. And for a limited time, you can get your first year of Drafts Pro for only $9.99. That's 50% off. For details on that, visit getdrafts.com/ATP. Thank you so much to Drafts for just being an amazing app and for sponsoring our show.
Vortec writes with a recommendation for what happens when you accidentally tap a HomePod near an outlet. Well, it turns out accessibility is for everyone, as we know, but often forget. You can go into touch accommodations and then have a hold duration. I presume this is specific to the HomePod. I don't have a HomePod, so I can't try this out myself.
Yes.
But anyways, you can set a hold duration for a very small amount of time. In this screenshot, Vortec had set it for 0.2 seconds. And that will presumably stop an accidental touch, and you can always make it longer if need be.
Yeah, I mean, this is better than nothing, but if only there was some way, if we had designed some kind of input device,
it's impossible, can't be done,
where you could maybe brush against it or dust it without actuating an action. But if you wanted to create the action, there wouldn't be any kind of weird gesture or delay. You could just maybe push it. I don't know if there's.
How about we add a camera to look at your eyeballs to tell if you're looking at the button, and then only if you have your eye is focused on the button, then it will activate the button. Because that's the only thing I can think of. Same with car interior designers. We need to have buttons on the steering wheel. It's not like people's hands are going to be near that area frequently, right? So we can just make those touch buttons. I'm sure that'll be fine.
Yeah, I just this makes the HomePod a little bit less annoying to use, but the fact is I actually do use the top tap input as a quick gesture to play pause or to go next track, double tap. I actually do that on a regular basis, so I don't want to make the interaction with it worse or slower or more annoying. I just want it to ignore accidental input, and
they'll add force touch sensors to it. It's still not a real button, but it has force touch. You have to press real hard.
Yeah, it's they're putting all this effort into things this would be so much better if it was just a button.
You just make it a button, an actual button that moves up and down.
It's even cheaper. It's what they have now is worse in every way.
And it's not like it's gonna wear out like a mouse button from hundreds of thousands of clicks either. It's not like you're sitting there hammering the top of the HomePod all day long. It's
I know.
It doesn't even have to be a good button. Just put a button on it. Jeez.
My Sonos speakers, they have buttons that you can press.
I know.
Just saying.
all the touch sensors on the top of the Apple devices. You got to go for the this variation of the frequent internet meme. Did a cat design this?
All right, moving along. Sevrir Bjorkvinson, I'm sorry if that's wrong. I'm doing my best here. Points out and reminds us that the Foo Fighters did perform at an Apple event. It was the iPhone 5 launch event, and even provided a YouTube link that we will put in the show notes. Good. I'm glad we're all excited about that. Hey, so Twitter is still a mess, as it turns out. So on February 2nd, Twitter Dev, which is the Twitter account that represents, I guess, the developer relations in so much as such a thing exists. Anyways, they tweeted on February 2nd, starting February 9th, we will no longer support free access to the Twitter API, both V2 and V1.1. A paid basic tier will be available instead. Over the years, hundreds of millions of people have sent over 1 trillion tweets with billions more every week. Twitter data are among the world's most powerful data sets. We're committed to enabling fast and comprehensive access so you can continue to build with us. We'll be back with more details on what you can expect next week. Well, those details still haven't arrived as we record, which is super fun. However, 2 days later, the chief idiot-in-chief wrote, responding to feedback, Twitter will enable a light write-only API for bots providing good content that is free. Well, thank you. That really clarifies things. Good content. Dare I ask, what is good content, King? I don't. I can't.
I feel like this is one of those things where like people focus a lot on like his individual words or the individual like details of the policy, but what you need to do is take a step back here and look at the big picture. This is an unreliable platform run by unreliable, erratic leaders. And so this is not a place to build anything. And if you already built something there, this is like, you know, one of many recent warning signs that you should probably look to move whatever it is you need that for, to move that role somewhere else. Because this is just it's an unreliable platform. You cannot build on this platform anymore. And if you've already built there, it's just a matter of time before anything you built there or invested in there is arbitrarily and capriciously set on fire.
Yeah, and it's not like charging for API access is a bad idea. It's a perfectly good idea. It's all about the way it's been done and the sort of lack of understanding of the sort of value ecosystem that the API has provided for Twitter. It's existed for so long. A lot of the value on Twitter is done by people having fun bots that, you know, make little accounts that you can follow or post the weather or show pictures of cats. Or I follow one that does a calendar accurate retelling of snippets of Lord of the Rings. So like when October happens in the book, you know, there'll be a tweet on that day in October saying where the characters are in the story or whatever. That's all like extremely low volume, silly, frivolous stuff that's getting by on the free API, right? And then, of course, there are bots that abuse it and do bad things, and then there are things that are actually, you know, using the API thoroughly. And it's like this is not the first site to have an API. Like this is a known thing that's been around for ages, and Twitter has history behind it. You want to monetize the API, you monetize the big ones that you know can pay. You allow the Lord of the Rings bot to continue to exist, and you have a free tier with low limits for everybody else to do. And you come out with that plan. You know, with ample warning, with a clear explanation of what it's going to be and the pricing structure and everything like that. And of course, they didn't do any of that. And so it's not the fact that they're charging for an API. It's not the fact that they're killing the whole free API. It's the fact that they just have no idea what they're doing. And they're just blundering through like a bull in a china shop, just unknowingly destroying value, scaring people away, frightening developers into saying, well, I don't even want to deal with that. So I'm just taking Twitter support out of my app. All the people who had bots are like, well, you know, I was already kind of sketchy on this place, but now it's just like, whatever, I'm just going to give up. And if I want to have my fun thing, I'll go somewhere else. It's just, you know, typical Elon Musk Twitter behavior, which is even if you are kind of sort of on the right track for something that might possibly be a good idea, do it in the worst way possible to negate any benefit you might have. And by the way, this still does not solve the giant money problem they have, because charging for the API, no matter how much they charge, there's just not enough money at this point to wring out of Twitter in the next year to be able to service their debt or whatever. So typical comedy of errors going on over there.
He's an incredible businessman, though. Let's not forget. Mastodon was killed for unspecified rule violations. Surprise, surprise. Tibor Martini writes, and this is the creator, according to Twitter, the app has violated Twitter rules and policies. I can't tell much more at the moment since the email they mentioned never arrived in my inbox. I try to get more information from Twitter, but they already mentioned that it may take a few days to get back to me.
It'll take a few days to get back to them. But by the time they get back to them, the free API will be turned off anyway, right? Yep. So it's like your app is dead no matter what. But that's what people were saying. Like Mastodon is that thing that lets you find your followers, find people you follow on Twitter. If they put a Mastodon address in their bio or in their name somewhere, it will find it and then it will let you follow them using your Mastodon account. There's a bunch of tools that are like that. This was one of the better ones. We talked about it on the past in the show. I think at some point where these things, they weren't banned. No, they were doing the thing where they weren't letting you put Mastodon addresses in your address. It's hard to keep track of all their weird rules. But anyway, one of the people like, oh, they killed the API so they could kill these migration services. I'm sure they enjoy the fact that these migration services won't be able to exist on the free API anymore. But these people could, in theory, just pay for the API if they wanted to continue this. Like, ascribing to them some like master plan, like they're there going, haha, we're going to do this thing. Or same thing with the bots. This is to get rid of the bots. Like, are you kidding? If there's anything in the world that is going to do like HTML scraping of your website to get around API limits, it's spammers, right? Like, don't worry. Spammers will be fine. They don't need your API, and they'll just find a way to pay for your API with stolen credit cards anyway. You'll have fun chasing them around. Yeah, solving spam is easy. Just end the free API. You'll never have spam again. I'm sure that'll work great. But yeah, this thing got suspended. Who knows why? It's not. You're not like Mark was saying. You're not dealing with. I know it's not an individual, but if you were to personify Twitter, you're not dealing with an adult here. You're not dealing with a professional adult. things are going to happen, and there's not going to be any explanation, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just like a completely unreliable, flaky other party that is going to ban you and not tell you why and tell you they're going to tell you and not ever send you that email. They're just going to flake out on you. Like, the whole company is like that. So it doesn't take much of interaction like that to make people think, yeah, screw this. I'm like, I don't need to deal with this. I was trying to make a fun Twitter account that posts pictures of kittens every day, and I don't need to deal with my thing getting banned and them telling me they're going to tell me what I did, but they never tell me, and I try to get back to them, but they don't have a communications department, and it's just whatever. It just makes people not want to deal with it.
But for what it's worth, Mastodon Flock, which is similar to Mastodon, is still working. Also, breaking news via Smythe in the chat. Paul Haddad of Tapbots just tweeted that sometime in the last couple hours, Twitter Dev finally announced some more details. This is breaking news. Delay the new rules for 4 days. Free bot level of up to 1,500 tweets a month for a single authenticated user. And Paul surmises that probably means no read access. You can only post. $100 a month for low level of API usage tier. So $100 a month if you want to post is what we're assuming. That's not factual, but that's what we're assuming. And then the premium API, which is the expensive one that had prices listed, goes away in favor of the enterprise API, which is the even more expensive one that didn't even have prices listed. And Paul continues, before anyone asks, this does not mean third-party clients are coming back. If anything, it is the exact opposite.
Yeah, having no read access kind of kills it doesn't entirely kill the I don't know, the Mastodon type scraping things kind of need read access in addition to, well, I guess they don't need write access, but the write only ones is like, oh, you can contribute content to this black hole, but you can't actually read from it. But like, for example, our askatp
Birdhouse would be okay.
Yeah, our askatp scraper that was looking for the askatp hashtag and putting it into a Google Sheet, that just uses read. It doesn't use write at all, and that thing would still be screwed. Not that we would ever pay for access to that anyway, but yeah, whatever. And this set of rules or whatever, imagine if you had like an adult come up with a plan for the API before you started announcing things, before you started canceling the API, and had like an actual plan and put it together and rolled it out smoothly with warning ahead of time and a PR push and marketing, like a real grown-up company. But that's not the way any of this works.
Imagine.
We are sponsored this week by Pushcut, a powerful iOS and iPadOS automation utility for shortcuts and HomeKit designed for automation power users like many of you. Pushcut allows you to send custom actionable notifications to any of your devices, create custom widgets, run background automations, and even use a dedicated device to run shortcuts at any time. This is so powerful. So, for instance, you can send yourself custom notifications triggered by shortcuts, HomeKit, or IFTTT. You can target specific devices among your fleet, so you can skip your iPad if you like. You can run an action in response to these notifications, including shortcuts. For example, you can do things like keep track of the progress in your 3D printer with images and turn off the power when the job is done. And you can create custom widgets with Pushcut. So you can create custom UI from scratch or use one of the many examples that they give you. And this is home screen or lock screen widgets. They can include content from your calendar or anything else on your device with shortcuts, photos, data from the web. And you can update the widget in response to shortcut automations or Zapier or anything else, notifications, whatever you want to do. You can customize your home screen. So you can have, say, a widget that tells you whether your front door is unlocked or your blinds are closed. You can get information on the next F1 race. You can count down until your next vacation and have that be on your lock screen every time you look at your phone. And the automation server function allows you to use a dedicated iOS device to run shortcuts whenever you like without confirmation prompts. This is very, very powerful. You can trigger these at certain intervals, specific dates and times, or in response to a webhook or in response to HomeKit. It's amazing what you can do with Pushcut. They also have background triggers. So you can do things like use location and custom notifications to prompt you to run a shortcut or choose a HomeKit scene or open a link. So you can do things like start a workout 10 minutes after getting to the gym, or remember to check your shopping list when you pass the store and it's during its opening hours. Or instead of notifications, you can run background actions such as shortcuts on your automation server, as previously mentioned, or even a webhook. There's so much here. Go to pushcut.io/ATP to find out more about how Pushcut can improve your automations and customize your iPhone and iPad. Download Pushcut and start your free trial now at pushcut.io/ATP. Thank you so much to Pushcut for sponsoring our show.
Marco, you've bought 1 to 7 HomePod 2s. Please tell me.
I bought 2 HomePod 2s.
Please tell me, are they worth the money? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they better than the ones? Have they solved all your problems? What's the situation?
Actually, before Marco starts, I have a comment on the picture that I'm assuming he will make the chapter art for this little section here. You posted a bunch of pictures of your little HomePod testing area that slowly gained more and more pods.
They kept multiplying.
Yes.
See the little baby ones after next to the two parents?
Yeah. Now, obviously, this is not, he doesn't have an anechoic chamber in his house. This is not super scientific testing, blah, blah, blah. Even down to the point of like some people saying, well, audio devices take a while to break in. And if you just got them today, like they need a week to break in and it's like, whatever. But this is not, we're not going super scientific here. But I will say that even from the very first picture, when I saw that you had arranged the right and left old and new HomePods in little stereo pairs next to each other, I mean, I guess... you can tell me, but like they're pretty close to each other. And my recollection is the HomePod ones at least did something where they like sprayed out sound and then saw how it bounced back to figure out how they're supposed to, they would, adjust to their environment, right? Mm-hmm. But the environment is weird when you've got HomePod, the two right ones right next to each other and the two left ones right next to each other, because it's not an apples to apples comparison. Because the environment for both of them is different. One of the right ones has something to its left, and one of the right ones has something to its right.
Yes. The reason I arranged them this way, and you're right on a bunch of things that I'll get to, but the reason I arranged them this way is so that each pair would have the same amount of space between it. Because otherwise, I figured, if I had, the new ones on the inside and the old ones on the outside, then it would be unfair.
No, I get it. You want the stereo distance to be the same.
Yes.
But like the distance to its neighbor, and here's the problem: like you can't why don't you just have two of them and then swap them out? You want to be able to do like A/B testing like immediately. You're not like, oh, let me just lug a bunch of bricks, right? So it's not ideal. The second thing is that, and this is an accurate test for Marco's environment for sure. But I always think about this when I see HomePod set up. You've got them on a counter with like a backsplash, right? That's not an ideal audio environment. A speaker that is like inches away from
not at all,
a stone backsplash or whatever. But that's how they're going to be used in a lot of places. So it is a representative test for Marco's environment, but again, it is not an anechoic chamber where you'll have this beautiful isolated speaker. So let's say this is a challenging scenario for all the little felt covered orbs involved. And I think also a challenging listening scenario because you can never know how much of what you're hearing is a result of the devices versus a result of the devices either not adjusting for their environment or badly adjusting for their environment. And then finally, how much of what you're hearing is just a result of sound is going to be bouncing off marble that's 2 inches behind it.
And it's not a marble, it's quartz. we have a marble table, like the little circular marble, and it's like the biggest pain in the butt. Oh my God, never get marble anything. Mm-hmm. Quartz is so much better. Anyway, so, and you're right. So, and I think a huge disclaimer here that all of these, I think, except the HomePod minis, but all so I had in this test 2 old HomePods, 2 new HomePods, 2 HomePod minis, and a 4th gen Amazon Echo. I only have one because the second one died after 2 seconds because they're garbage. They're the worst built Amazon thing I've ever had. Anyway, so and I tested them in stereo pairs and in single configurations. Except for the Echo, where I only have one, so I couldn't test a stereo pair of that. A huge disclaimer here that, again, besides the HomePod Mini, which I think doesn't do this, all of the other ones, maybe the Echo, do some kind of sound processing based on whatever surroundings they sense, or like the HomePod, for instance, has a microphone inside of it that tweaks the bass response, I think, and it does measure reflections and everything. If you shake a HomePod while it's playing, it has accelerometers to detect that it's been moved, and it will kind of reset itself and readapt the sound briefly. It sounds really weird. Try it. But anyway, with all that said, these are all speakers that use a lot of software processing. What I try to do when I'm judging, does this sound better than that or whatever, and how does it sound better? I also have to consider the fact that not only are people's environments different, but the state of the software is going to vary over time. And so it might be adjusting for something in my room that somebody else wouldn't have, and it even might be that maybe in a software update, they'll tweak the mix slightly over time as well. So that's a huge disclaimer. So what I'm really judging here is, to some degree, how they sound now, but also you can tell when you're judging a speaker or a headphone, you can tell, or a microphone even, you can tell what you can fix in EQ versus what you can't. if you look at a frequency response graph, this you'll see these in reviews sometimes where it'll have like 30 hertz on one side and 16,000 or 20,000 hertz on the other side. It'll show a logarithmic graph. You'll see a little wavy line. It's usually it's supposed to be somewhat flat. In practice, usually you see like a slow hump up on the bass side on the left side, and then all the way on the right, when the high treble frequencies, you see it go zigzag, 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 kind of and fall off at the end. A frequency response graph is the kind of thing where you can use EQ to tweak things about that you don't like a little bit to some extent. But where EQ doesn't help you and processing doesn't help you is in other areas of sound design. And you'll have to forgive me, I'm not a speaker or headphone designer, so I know a little bit about this stuff because this is like a world that I'm a big enthusiast about, but a lot of the science I don't know. So with that disclaimer in mind, and I'm sure we'll hear from people who design speakers in our audience. So with that being said, so other factors, for instance, are things like distortion characteristics or like weird, phase interference issues you can get with certain designs of, like certain physical designs of the enclosure the speakers are in, the drivers, how they're arranged. There's all these different other factors, and a lot of those can't be corrected in EQ. So what I'm judging here, this is a huge preamble, I know, this is almost John level of preamble. What I'm judging here, I'm trying to listen to like, what is the speaker capable of? And then what is it doing now? As like kind of two separate things. Because what it's doing now could be adjusted with software over time. What it's capable of, for the most part, can't.
And speaking of these frequency response curves and phase stuff or whatever, one of the things that Dirac Live software that I've talked about in the past, like an app that you run on your Mac or PC that talks to your receiver, that measures your speakers with stereo, with a microphone that you put where your head would be, it takes these frequency response curves and it will level them out with very detailed EQ and everything. And it will also tell you these speakers are out of phase. There's destructive interference over here. Like that's what those applications do, because you can't really do it by ear. You need sort of equipment to do it. And if you have your speakers wired the wrong way, if you have your subwoofer phase switched the wrong way, if your crossover is in the wrong spot, the software will tell you, because you might not know what you're supposed to. I certainly don't. What I'm supposed to be listening for, or I hear this and I know this wrong, but the software will literally tell you until you get your thing sounding as good as it possibly can with your equipment, which is actually fairly challenging. Presumably, HomePods are doing something similar internally, but all they can do is change the sound that comes out of them. I don't think they ever demand that you move them. Like, hey, nobody puts HomePod in a corner. What am I doing? I'm in a corner and a picture frame is blocking me. But my HomePod is, by the way, behind a bunch of fractured pictures of my dog because I don't care what it sounds like. And I bet it hates that because it's like the worst environment. Like, it's in a corner. It's got glass pictures in front of it.
Blocked
like,
by glass. Oh, God.
I'm listening to podcasts on you, HomePod, and most of the time you do nothing. And usually you can't even turn off my lights. So shut up and take it. But anyway, the Dirac software does help with stuff like that. And it is fun to kind of tweak manually. But the HomePod is like, I'll do that all for you. And presumably it does a passable job.
And one other quick thing, John just mentioned like the alleged phenomenon of break-in periods for headphones or speakers. This has been pretty widely discredited as a thing that's real. What is real is that your perception of the sound adjusts. So it's not that the speakers are being broken in. It's that your ears are being broken in, like your brain's being broken in. That's what's actually happening. And so if there is something about a particular transducer that is different from what you are used to before that, over time you get used to that. You stop hearing it as like, oh, that's weirdly harsh or different. That just becomes what you think of as normal. It's almost like the way, like your eyes perform automatic white balancing. It's the same thing for sound. Your brain's being broken in. And then finally, how I was A/B testing them. What you want to do if you're comparing speakers like this, you want to be able to play the same thing on all of them and to be able to switch between them as quickly as possible. If you have to like unplug stuff, start something else, start something, like it becomes much harder. Like if the difference between them is more than a couple of seconds, it becomes much harder to remember how that sounded and try to compare. You can't rely on memory for much here. It has to be quick, being able to transition between them quickly. That's how you can really tell the differences. And when you can do that, the differences become very apparent. So the way I do this, I use AirPlay, and I play to all of them at the same time, and I like as a group in the AirPlay selector, and then you drop down the AirPlay selector so you get individual volume sliders for each speaker, and I just would drag to 0 the ones I wasn't listening to, and drag up the one that I was testing, and then quickly swap that. Drag that one down, drag this one up.
Did you do the thing where you drag all the sliders down except for one pair and then shake that pair? And then drag all the sliders down except for another pair and then shake that pair? Because what you want them to do is to adjust to their acoustic environment when other speakers aren't playing in their face. You know what I mean?
I did not do that. I probably should have done that, but I didn't. But again, I think, I want to not lean too heavily on the specifics of whatever the adaptive EQ processing is doing at that moment. Because, again, that can change. That changes a lot with environment.
But that's going to change the sound of the speakers, too.
Trust me, it doesn't change sound like this.
All right. Well,
So, my opening. So, first, let me cover the non-sound aspects first. Aesthetics, physical design. The new HomePod compared to the old one is very similar overall looking. You would only notice the differences if you saw them side by side for the most part, because it still looks like approximately the same size cylinder. It has the same material on the outside, at least the white ones. I don't have the black ones to compare.
Is it skinnier, or is that just an optical illusion because the top disc is bigger?
I think it's just, if you look at the measurements, they're very similar. Like, it's slightly shorter. It might be a little bit fatter, but it looks like the same kind of object. You could change them out, and the less observant or less caring members of your household wouldn't notice, until you touch the top. The biggest difference you'll notice is that the top screen, the quote screen, the top LED color visualizer thing now goes all the way to the edge and is bigger. It is also kind of, it's inset instead of being convex, but that honestly doesn't matter in practice. It'll collect dust a little bit differently, but otherwise, as you tap it to dust it off, you'll blast your Foo Fighters at night again. But anyway, with the previous one, when it was totally not playing anything, like just sitting there idle or off, you wouldn't see the plus and minus that indicated the volume buttons. They were themselves individually lit little white LED things that would turn off, so it would just look like a flat white surface. The new one, the plus and minus are permanently etched in there, so they're just like they're drawn on the top, so you can always see the plus and minus. Some people saw this as a downgrade. I see this as a positive thing, because if you nudge your HomePod on the counter as you're working on your kitchen counter accidentally, and you want to reset it and make sure it's aligned correctly, you can just look at the plus and minus. It's always there, and you can say, oh, now it's straight. Okay. So that to me is an improvement. The wider color panel of the LEDs on top, I don't think it's an improvement. When it's just playing, it does the same thing as a HomePod Mini. If you have a HomePod Mini, it's that same pattern. So when it's just playing, it's showing this kind of like soft white glow from the middle, and that's fine. When Siri is processing, it's attempting to do that kind of Siri like multicolor pulsing logo thing, and it does it across the whole service. And this is now a pretty big service, and so it kind of looks garish. And I don't think this panel I don't think the LEDs needed to go all the way to the edge the way they do now. And if they were looking to cut costs somewhere, I don't know why they didn't cut costs there, because that seems to serve no real purpose except looking garish during Siri requests and showing this weird rainbow light show at a scale that I don't think it was designed for. It looks better on the smaller ones, but it doesn't look good on the big size.
It's interesting that this is like a thing that Apple hasn't done in ages and didn't really do that much before, which is have lights on their devices try to imbue some kind of personality. We've talked about the breathing sleep light way back when on the laptops, or the glowing Apple logo on the back of the old laptop screens. In general, if Apple wants to do something to imbue a device with dynamic personality, they use a screen. And still, on all the HomePods, no screens. And I can't recall the last time I saw them say, okay, we're not going to have a screen. But what they want to do is like if you hold down like the power button on your phone and you see that Siri colored blob thing. This is like, well, if we could, we'd show the Siri colored blob thing, because that's our branding for Siri. When you're interacting with it, whatever that colored blob thing that waves around, it's a cool little animation. Why don't we show that? Well, we can't. We don't have a screen. Well, can we show like a really blurry version of that with just a bunch of RGB LEDs under like a translucent frosted surface? It's like we could, but I feel like that doesn't accomplish the branding, because it's like it reminds you of the branding, but it's like the branding is trapped underneath cloudy glass and you can't really see it. And the second thing is, like, what value does that add? Does it look good? Does it put on a laser light show? Does it indicate something to you from a distance any more than like just a single LED would or something like that? It's a strange gesture to spend that much time and space on a thing that isn't a screen. And I'm not particularly against it. Like, I mean, I don't mind it on mine or whatever. It just reminds me of an older Apple that wanted to put these type of sort of, I don't know, like a appearance personality, dynamic appearance personality into their hardware that is not a screen. And we keep waiting for a HomePod-like device with a screen on it, but it's not this one.
To some extent, I actually don't mind it not being a screen, just because in most contexts where you'd put these things, you don't really have a lot of visibility onto that top surface anyway. Like, it's not like you can't see it from across the room.
Yeah, having the screen face the ceiling is not great. Yeah,
right. So anyway, so that's the physical stuff aside. I did replace the power cords with nice shorter ones now. They came in today, and I'm super happy about that. That's nice. But anyway, so on to the sound. This is what everybody wants to know. Does it sound better? And frankly, all the reviews that are like, yeah, it sounds pretty much the same. It doesn't. It does not sound pretty much the same. It sounds surprisingly different. Much more different than I thought it would. I'm going to start easily. The bass. It is lighter. The bass is lighter. However, there are asterisks on this. In general, the new ones have less bass at medium to high volume, and they have actually a lower maximum volume. The old ones go louder. Now, this is all relative. These are still really impressive for their size. And anything else that's anywhere near their size, when you compare them to other multi-$100 premium, smart speakers or self-powered speakers, usually what people compare these to are much larger than them, because the things that cost $300 are usually much larger than them. But in this size class, they do shockingly well at bass and volume. If you have a large room, again, going back to the home theater thing, it might not be enough. That being said, for their size, still great, still plenty of bass, but it is definitely a reduction in bass strength from before. That's at medium to high volumes. Now, at lower volumes, it seems like there's plenty of bass there. And what I think they are doing, a lot of people don't realize this, but in any kind of speaker that has some kind of processing going on that isn't just like an amp connected to some wired speakers that you turn the knob and it gets louder. In most other like modern powered speakers that have their own kind of DSP stuff built in, many of them will actually dynamically ramp the bass down as the volume goes up. And there are multiple reasons for this, but the two key ones are, number one, it sounds really nice to have relatively strong bass when it's turned down lower. It sounds like a more premium, nice, rich experience. But if you take that exact same amount of bass that's down low, and like you'll see this like in Bose products, like this is a common thing, or like any of like the like fancy powered speaker brands, B&O, B&W, Sonos might even do this in some of their power stuff. I'm not positive on that, but anything that does processing on the sound, at low volumes, the bass will be proportionally much more strong than if you turn it up a lot. It would sound ridiculous if the bass was that strong at the high volume. So they actually ramp it down. Part of that is because, again, it sounds better that way, makes it sound better at lower volumes without having the negatives of very loud bass of like, when you turn it up, you wouldn't want it to like, be really boomy and like vibrate things in your house or, anger your neighbors or whatever else. I think it's doing that to a pretty strong degree. I haven't measured that. I didn't have time or equipment, frankly, to measure that. But it sounds like it's doing dynamic bass roll-off as the volume goes up. And I think for a product of this category, that's the right choice. The other reason somebody might not want to have bass that strong at high volumes is it takes a very powerful amp to deliver high volume bass. I think in a lot of these products, the amp just is not spec'd for that much power. The old HomePod had a custom designed like main woofer amp. I tried to look up the specs for it. Nobody really has them because it's a custom designed chip from this company. As far as I could tell, no one has figured out yet what the chip is in the new HomePod. So I couldn't find any information to compare. Like, does the bass amp actually have less wattage or less power potential in the new one? I would speculate that it probably does.
And by the way, this is why if you have a individual component set up and you have a receiver that puts out however many watts per channel, the subwoofer that you buy will plug into the wall because it has its own amplifier.
Yes, powered subwoofer is the way to go.
Yeah, right. Because it doesn't like all the two things in the receivers. One, no matter how much power per channel they say in the receivers, like whatever, 150 watts per channel, still it's a hangover of historical things. That number you see, like 150 watts, that's for two channels. They don't if you put 7 speakers, you don't get 150 watts on all 7 of the speakers. The math doesn't add up real fast. But for historical reasons, because stereo receivers used to just be like that, that is still the standard. And not only that, but the manufacturer won't even tell you how many watts you get if you hook up 7 speakers. And then, yes, the 0.1 for the subwoofer, that's a powered subwoofer. That plugs into a different outlet in a wall. It's got its own amplifier.
The other thing to consider, like, when by saying it has less bass, that even could be, again, this could be software. It has an internal microphone to measure the bass response and any kind of, resonances and stuff. It might just be throttling its own bass to prevent, like, vibration and stuff. So there's all sorts of things that go into this. But so in short, it sounds, compared to the old one, it sounds like there's less bass at high volume, but at low volume it sounds about the same and might even have more. It sounds very pleasant on the bass at moderate to low volumes. I'll tell you that for sure. So anyway, that's the bass. The mid-range and the treble. This is now, we're moving into the tweeters. And by the way, this is one of the biggest reasons why the HomePod Mini, which only has one speaker cone in there, it uses a, quote, passive radiator design for the bass. I'm not entirely sure what those do, but the Mini effectively is one speaker cone in there, like one driver. And the HomePod, as we know, has the one big 4-inch woofer that faces, I think, up from the middle, and then it has formerly 7, now 5 tweeters around the bottom. And the whole reason for this is to separate these out. If you want something to be able to produce bass, you need a pretty large speaker cone that moves in big waves forward and back. That's how you make good bass. But a very large speaker cone has a lot of mass to move. And if you want to make something that produces very good high-frequency sounds, like in the treble range, you actually want as little mass moving as possible because you want it to be vibrating really small, really fast. And so it's kind of impossible to physically design the same speaker cone, like one speaker cone that does really good bass and really good treble. That's why when you have nicer speakers, they tend to have more drivers, and they cover different size classes, basically. You might have a few woofers or one big woofer, and usually you have like maybe a mid-range driver, maybe a little tiny tweeter, or you'll have, just a woofer and a tweeter, but that's why these are separated. And so you might think that when you go from the old HomePod with the 7 tweeters to the new HomePod with 5, you might think this would hurt its treble performance in some meaningful way. And I can tell you that the treble and the mid-range sound way better on the new one. It is the opposite of what you think it would be. The new one, treble and mid-range sound awesome. I am a huge snob for these things. I don't care that much about bass. I care a lot about mid-range and a little bit about treble. I care about vocals sounding smooth, guitars sounding smooth, and having them be present, having them be right there, hitting you in the face in the middle of the mix. Oftentimes what cheap, crappy speakers and headphones will do is they'll have kind of a weak response in that kind of mid-range vocals and guitars and pianos kind of area. It almost gets pushed back in the mix so you don't hear it too much. They'll like crank up the response for the bass and treble so that it kind of masks the crappy, distorted, harsh mid-range they have in the middle there. And I don't like that. I want to hear really clear, crisp vocals and really strong, smooth guitars. That's what I want in my music. That's my favorite part of the music. Very, very few speakers or headphones are able to deliver that very well. The whole reason I love my KEF or KEF, I don't know what it is, that series of the Q150, the Q350, they have the best mid-range I've ever heard in a speaker. The whole reason I love my ridiculously old, super high needs, Hi-Fi Man HE6 headphones is because they have the best mid-range I've ever heard in headphones. These new full-size HomePods have really great mid-range. Smoothness, detail, lack of harshness, lack of distortion in the mid-range. It's amazing in these new HomePods. And so this makes vocals sound better. Pianos, guitars, like the kind of, the main like middle of the frequency range, those all sound really great. What I'm trying to get away from, like when I talk about mid-range distortion, what this kind of sounds like is, those bands came out like in the early 2000s where it sounds kind of like they're talking through a phone as they're singing like I can't even do it. It's like is it the Strokes, the Killers, like whatever, those kind of bands. It's and they did it intentionally, that was part of their style, but it sounds like kind of a crunchy filter on the vocals, or it's kind of like you're talking through an old telephone. That kind of sound effect. Crappy mid-range on speakers and headphones makes all vocals sound a little bit like that. It's like a little bit of distortion in the mid-range that does not sound good. And the opposite of that is when things sound clear. It just sounds like someone's there singing in the room with you. In audio terms, people talk about, they use the word transparency. And what you want, and unfortunately, this is kind of a, it's a tricky term because everyone's definition of transparent is different in audio, but the idea of transparency is you don't notice the speaker, you don't notice the headphone, it just sounds like the music is there in the room. It isn't imparting a bunch of, filters or effects or noticeable artifacts on the music. It is just, it sounds natural. That's how these sound in the mid-range and the treble, way more than the old ones. And the old ones sounded great overall. But when you do a side-by-side comparison, it's no contest. Mid-range and treble are way, way nicer and clearer and better on the new ones. Frankly, I'm blown away. I'm so happy with how good these are in that area. Again, if you compare these, put on whatever track you like. But if you really want to hear the kind of differences, put on a track that has like a singer with a piano or something, or like a singer with a guitar, like one of those. There's not a ton going on. You can just hear that, and you will hear there's a pretty substantial difference between the two. And so whatever they did to reduce from 7 tweeters to 5, I can tell you not only is not a downgrade, it's a massive upgrade. Like just overall, the new HomePod in those ranges, and even frankly in the bass, it just sounds way better overall.
What they might have done is bought 5 slightly more expensive tweeters instead of 7 slightly less expensive tweeters. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
spend
maybe
a similar amount of money but get a higher quality thing. And speaking of the what you're just describing about the sort of the transparency of the mid-range and stuff, I watched a review recently. They were reviewing receivers, believe it or not. Like they had a set of speakers that was the same through all the tests, but they were saying with a given set of speakers that we think are these fancy high-end speakers or whatever, that the receivers were imparting some receivers would impart a personality on things like vocals in the mid-range or whatever, and they described it like by brand that some particular brands, like I think it was like Marantz and some other fancy expensive one, had a more rounded sound, and they said like NAD was 100% neutral right in the middle and didn't impart any personality on the sound whatsoever, and then they had the other end was like Sony or Yamaha that was more of a sharp or sparkly sound. If you had to, I know these words are so bad because if you watch a lot of
I would caution that there is a lot of placebo effect in a lot of those kind of judgments.
Well, but I know what they're talking about. As someone who's not an audiophile, I think everyone has heard something where what you talked about even with podcasting, with sibilance, where the treble is too sharp, right? That is just too kind of spiky in your ears, and then the more rounded one, like Casey would like on vinyl, where all the edges are cut off of everything, and it sounds like someone's singing through a sock, but people like it because it smooths off all the sharp edges, right?
You're the worst.
Yeah, it smooths off all the sharp edges, and then neutral. Lots of people have bad things to say about audio devices that are like, if you use something to measure, like I'm going to objectively measure the frequency response. Wow, look at this frequency response. It's almost exactly level. It's extremely neutral. It doesn't impart anything. Like it's just like perfectly clean. And you hear things through that, and people go, yeah, I don't like how much that sounds. It sounds better on one of the ones that is less neutral, that does more to the sound instead of just having like a completely flat frequency response, but instead accentuates whatever part of the sound that they like. In your case, you like the mids and the highs. Some people might like it accentuated in the bass. That's not a neutral profile, whether it's done with EQ or done with processing or done like as part of just the nature of the set of drivers they have. The difficulty with audio equipment is that it's not something that you can measure scientifically and say this one has the flattest frequency response, therefore it's the best, or it has the least distortion, flattest frequency response, like it's all scientifically accurate, and then you'll put it next to something that just has way more bass than is in the original recording, and people will like that better if they like bass. Or in your case, I feel like if you get the mids and the treble accentuated more than some people might like it, that's exactly what you want out of it. So that's why audio reviews are so difficult, and that's why they come up with all these different words for it. And even in the receiver review, they weren't saying that one of those, that spectrum was worse or better. They're saying it depends on what you want. And the example they gave was the NAD one, which is a super expensive, extremely neutral thing or whatever. They say some people hate that. Some people think it sounds quote unquote dead, and they'd rather have one of the other brands that imparts more quote unquote personality on the sound, depending on what personality they want in the sound, depending on what part of the sound is important for them to hear. And honestly, for people our age and older, depending on what frequencies they can still hear
Right.
in their decrepit old age. That's why very often young children have very different ideas about what sounds good and what doesn't when it comes to music.
It's, setting aside whether amps really make that big of a noticeable difference on the sound quality, which I question, honestly. In my experience, they really don't, but
it's not, the receivers aren't acting as amplifiers here. It's because the receivers are doing processing.
Oh, okay.
Everything is doing processing now. So it's not, that's what they're saying, that the processing that these things are put in, it's not just straight up, like, it's not like an analog amplifier where they're measuring it that way.
Right. But like, and it's funny, like, there's a long time ago, decades ago, I think the Harman Audio Company developed this thing called the Harman curve. And this is through some kind of scientific or survey-based method, whatever it was, they devised like what people actually want out of an ideal frequency response is not flat. It's not like perfectly even reproducing of all frequencies. It's a certain curve that people find most desirable, and they publish this as the Harman curve. And over the last many decades, the manufacturers of audio gear have been slowly trying to make their stuff more closely match the Harman curve. And this kills me because I don't like the Harman curve. I find it sounds really boring.
And it's not that the Harman curve is arbitrary, but it is subjective, right? It's not completely arbitrary, because I'm sure they did ask people what they thought sounded better. But people are different. First of all, people's physical hearing is different, but second of all, people's taste is different. So targeting a matching of any particular curve exactly is, unless you know what your curve is, and your name is Mr. Harman or Mrs. Harman, you don't know. Well, that's why you have to sort of adjust the thing to your liking and listen to things against each other to decide which one actually sounds better to you. But there is some scientific basis, like the things you mentioned, distortion, or like that, for example, if you look at a curve and it just drops off before you even get close to the low frequencies, that's not going to have any bass, or if it goes off a cliff before it gets to the highs, that's going to suck too. So there is a room for a scientific assessment of the sounds that can and can't be reproduced by a sound system, or sounds that can and can't be reproduced by a sound system without massive distortion that destroys it. But once you start getting into the details of, okay, now I'm making a decision. Do I want the Harman curve? Do I want something different than the Harman curve? What you want is whatever frequency response is desirable for you. You want to be able to hear that without distortion at the volumes you want to listen.
Yeah, exactly. And frankly, I have looked at so many frequency response graphs trying to figure out, like, before I want to buy like a pair of headphones, like trying to figure like, is this what I want? Is this going to sound good to me? And it's so rare that my expectations from the frequency response graph have matched how happy I am with the actual thing when I get it. All these other factors are at play, so you really need to like kind of try the stuff out yourself. Like it's really hard to get much out of a frequency response graph that could tell you, am I going to like this or not, or is this good or not?
Do you look at the frequency response graph from the Dave 2D YouTube video, which we'll put in the show notes?
I did.
It's hard to see in that when we put it in the show notes, but if you look at the actual video and you just look at HomePod 1 versus 2.
Yes, and I see that, and it's funny, like, so his conclusion, I like Dave 2D, he's good, but his conclusion here was kind of like, oh yeah, they sound about the same, but like if you look at this frequency response graph, there are gaps of like 5-8 decibels, like between some of the, like those are big gaps. Look right in the middle. Look right in the mid range. The HomePod is in orange, and there's a huge dip in the mid range there, and then a little bit past the mid range, past 1 kilohertz, there's a huge spike on the new HomePod. That to me is a big difference, because that's kind of the area you're talking about, isn't it? Kind of the mid range, the middle of that graph. And the HomePod 1 has a big divot cut out of it, and the HomePod 2 is level and then has a big spike at the higher frequencies, and that is obviously the Marco spike. That's the part that you like. And as you get into the treble range, like above the 10K, you start seeing there's like a 10 decibel gap, like in frequency ranges that are still audible. So like you can see what I'm talking about in this graph. Like it's not going to tell you exactly how the thing sounds. You got to hear it for yourself. But Apple in recent years, between, especially with the AirPods, and in my case, I don't have any real experience with the regular AirPods because they wouldn't really fit me. But the AirPod Pros in particular, and also even the AirPod Max, which I I wish those were comfortable on me because they sound really good. But Apple has really mastered a certain frequency mix that sounds really, really good, but yet not offensive to pretty much anybody. It's a great kind of all-arounder. It's not the Harman curve, but it probably isn't too far from it if I had to guess. I don't have it in front of me, but because what Apple's recent high-end speaker designs, again, AirPods Pro, AirPods Max, HomePod, they sound really good. Even like their built-in speakers on a lot of their computers now, like the built-in speakers on the studio display or on like some of the laptops, obviously within the realm of what you can do in those size classifications and the space you have in the enclosures and stuff and the budget, they do surprisingly well. Like Apple's really good at making stuff that sounds pretty good to pretty much everybody, and this is not Beats. Beats had a much more personality in their sound that was much more bass heavy. They would frequently withdraw the mid range. You could hear boom boom, and sometimes I wish they would add EQs to some of their products. But in this case, with the exception of how much bass you want, and there is a setting that you can say reduce bass, which as far as I can tell, I tried it out. As far as I can tell, it seems to just be like a high pass filter, but like it just lets the ring frequency above maybe like 100 hertz or something like that. Like it cuts out all of the bass below that. So you really don't want that unless you're in like a situation like maybe if you're in an apartment with thin walls or if, the sound travels through the floor and you want to be able to watch movies with it. That's a different story. But for most listening, I wouldn't recommend using that setting if you can help it. But that's the only setting they have to control the audio of this product. And I wish there was maybe a little more control over the bass because like I would ask for a little bit more out of it sometimes. Some people would ask for a little bit less, and that seems to be the main holdup. But again, for the most part, they've made a product here that sounds really great and really great to pretty much everybody, I think. Now, a few more details on the sound before I move on. What I would describe it most as is transparent. You really don't notice the speaker. Music just sounds good. You do get, in a stereo pair, you do get the larger sound stage. And what that's a term of art in the audio world. It basically means like how big does the sound source sound like it is? Like does it sound like you're hearing music from a huge wide area, or does it sound like it's all coming out of like one little point? And when you have a stereo pair, physics are helping you a lot. This is why soundbars suck. This is why individual speakers are not as good as stereo pairs. What the hell, Siri? My watch keeps. I don't know. Why is my watch? Oh, because I'm moving my hand while talking because I'm Italian. All right. Anyway, the soundstage on these, like how big the sound space sounds, even on just one, even when comparing single speakers, the new HomePod soundstage is much wider, much larger than the old one. And when you hear the stereo pair, again, it's not as big of a difference as when comparing individuals because stereo, again, it's helping with physics there, but you get a larger soundstage. It sounds airier. It sounds like it's coming from a larger space. That's a very good thing. I did one comparison because people have often asked, like if they already have a HomePod Mini or if they have two HomePod Minis because they're so inexpensive. And then people have often asked like, what's better, a single large HomePod or a stereo pair of HomePod Minis? I did that test. The single large HomePod I would still prefer in most cases just because the soundstage is actually not that much worse than two HomePod Minis, and the rest of the audio just sounds so much better. The vocals, the mid-range, the treble, it just sounds so much better on the big one. So I would say compared to two Minis, a single large HomePod is better for most people's uses. When compared to the HomePod Mini in a stereo pair versus stereo pair. Again, the HomePod Mini, it's a very small speaker. It's very, very small. And again, there's only one driver in there. And it's a third the price, about a third to a quarter the size. So this is not a fair comparison, and it shows. The HomePod Mini is a great product for its price and size. But the large HomePod totally destroys it in audio quality. And that's just the nature of this difference here. Like that's a big difference in physicality there. The big HomePods have much larger soundstage, much better treble response, much better bass response, much smoother and better mid-range. The HomePod Mini has the problem I was talking about before, where the vocals and guitars are kind of withdrawn. They're kind of pushed back in the mix. It just isn't doing a good job of reproducing those. So the full-size HomePods are a large step above the minis. People often ask about how the HomePods compare to just speakers, regular like bookshelf size speakers or countertop or desktop monitors, whatever size speakers you think are similar to HomePods. Which, by the way, HomePods are way smaller than most bookshelf speakers. But anyway, that's beside the point. How they compare to bookshelf speakers, and I would say I have heard better bookshelf speakers than the HomePods. I just said my KEF Q150s are better sounding in most ways. They also have way less bass. I need a subwoofer with them. I don't need a subwoofer with the HomePods for the most part. And they're way bigger, like way bigger. Comparing it to bookshelf speakers is not super useful because they're just so much smaller and don't need to be amplified and everything else. But then also, where the HomePods really shine is a situation like where I have them, where they're on my kitchen counter. Well, I'm oftentimes not working in front of them. I'm often working next to them, off to the side. The HomePod minis do an okay job of kind of off-axis listening when you're not right in front of them, when you're off to one side. But the full-size HomePods do a really great job of it. They sound really good even when you aren't directly in front of them. So if you're in a situation like this where you have them somewhere where you will often not be right in front of them, if you'll be off to one side, the HomePods, the full-size ones, are, I think, possibly the best products I've ever heard in this category. They are amazing for that, and they destroy almost all of the competition people usually would compare them to. They destroy them in off-axis listening. They're so much better for that. It doesn't sound like you're listening to a crappy treble-reduced side version of the sound. You just hear the music, and it's not as good as standing in front of them, but it's still really good.
They're radially symmetrical. That's why. Like, they are not directional. Like, regular speakers have their speaker cones facing a single direction. That's not true of the HomePods. There is no sort of front, or despite Marco wanting his to be aligned or whatever, there is no front or back. Like, the base one is pointing either directly up or directly down. I forget which. And then the 5 that are surrounded, they're equally spaced in a circle. Like, that's the whole point of this device. That's why these devices are that's why the HomePod anyway is round. There is no wrong place to put it, and so it should be exactly the same no matter where you are, plus or minus the fact that you have it up against the backsplash, or there's a mixer in the way, or whatever. Like, obviously physical obstructions are going to cause it, but that's why these speakers are like, look, just put it wherever you're in your house. And that whole thing of like, it's saying, oh, I'm going to play sound and figure out how to adjust myself, half of that is figuring out which one of my tweeters is blocked by a wall, and I should maybe not send super amount of sound into that one tweeter because it's pointless. It's going to be bouncing all over the place.
Yeah. So when you compare HomePods to, and again, anything else, say the Sonos One, which is a common comparison, which I find massively overrated. The Sonos One is a totally fine, small, cheap speaker. It sounds closer to the HomePod Mini than the full-size HomePod. Price-wise, it's kind of right in the middle, and so I respect that. It isn't $300. It's about $200. So, that's fine, but it's also as big as a HomePod. And I think if you're going to have that amount, that size on a countertop with the HomePod, with the Sonos One, I think unless you want the Sonos ecosystem for other reasons, I think the full-size HomePod for $100 more, you get a lot more than $100 worth of additional sound quality. And again, the Sonos One is highly directional. The HomePod Mini is mostly directional. It's kind of, the HomePod Mini is kind of mushes the sound. There's not a lot of definition there. What tends to be very directional is the higher frequencies, the treble frequencies. And the HomePod Mini has such poor treble response that you don't really notice as much. So it's less important.
Isn't the HomePod Mini also radially symmetrical internally?
No, it's just one driver. It's one speaker.
Right, but isn't it pointing straight down?
Oh, I think you might be right. I think you're right. I forgot about that.
Obviously, that's not ideal direction for a speaker to be facing. Just like ask any person with a television with down-firing speakers, which is very common these days. It's not great. But I think the HomePod Mini, if it's directional, it's just because it has no control over the bounce. Unlike the big HomePod, which can decide how much power to put in any of its 5 or 7 tweeters pointing in different directions. What the hell can the Mini do? It's like, well, I have one speaker and it's facing the direction it's facing, and that direction is down or up. I don't know if it's up or down. I'll have to look at the cutaway.
I think it faces down. Anyway, you're right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Anyway, so again, this is an area where the HomePods really excel. And so when you're looking at what should you buy, what should you have for your area, again, if you're setting up things like a TV speaker system, you'll probably be better off with like regular bookshelf or other speakers, because you're not going to be watching TV from 90 degrees off axis. Like you're going to be like
have an LCD TV.
yeah, like you're going to be watching the front of it pretty much from the front. And from enough distance that minor variations in being, a few degrees off axis here and there aren't going to matter. Whereas if it's on a kitchen counter, or, in the smallest rooms of your house, or wherever else you might use a HomePod, or if you only have room for one of them because of, or various, if you only have budget for one of them, it's just a much more versatile speaker for many more different spaces than you can fit bookshelf speakers or other systems like that. So anyway, I'll try to be quick here with the rest of these things. Let's see. Compared to the Echo, the Amazon Echo 4th generation, when I was talking earlier about being able to EQ away certain flaws or not, one of the common strategies that cheap electronic designers will use to make up for the fact that their speakers suck, again, they'll use some kind of EQ, especially in treble. It's commonly done in treble where the sound when in the 80s and 90s or whatever, when you had the treble knob on your boombox and you would turn it all the way up, and everything would sound kind of really crisp and everything, but it would sound a little aggressively crisp, and even that crispness would be a little distorted. It was not smooth or natural sounding. It just sounded artificially boosted too much. That's how the Amazon Echo sounds. It sounds like they took a very cheap speaker and used EQ to really crank up something it really was not able to do very well. And it just sounds like a very over-processed, harsh, sharp sound. It just sounds awful to me. The Amazon Echo, the original cylinder shaped one from a million years ago, that was a totally fine product for its time. There are many better products now. And the modern Echo is not one of them. It's better than the old cylinder, but it isn't as much better as you would think. So I did also compare Siri versus Alexa. And this is, again, so much variation here. In general, and this will kind of speak to the Siri performance in the new HomePods, Siri has gotten way faster with the new SoC. It is just noticeable. It's I measured, we're saving 5 or 6 seconds in certain responses, depending on what you're asking. Siri is now almost as fast as Alexa with most common things. There's a couple of exceptions which we'll get to in a second, but for the most part, so I would do things like I would say, hey, Dingus, stop, and measure how long from when I stopped saying the word stop until it actually stopped. How long did it take with each voice? And I did a whole bunch of tests to make sure it wasn't some kind of weird fluke. I did it in different noise levels, whether the music was playing loudly or not, how close I was, how far I was. Both the Echo and the new HomePod and the old HomePod and the HomePod Mini all have really great microphones. And they were all able to hear me ridiculously well, even from I would walk to the other side of the floor and kind of just say at regular volume, hey, thing, stop. And just kind of see, while music was playing, and see if they could hear me. And they did. It was remarkable. The microphones on all of these are extremely good and can pick up you speaking at normal volume, even with music playing, even from far away. If you're concerned about privacy, that should terrify you, and that should maybe sway you more in the Apple direction, I would say, compared to the Amazon system for the police. So anyway, overall performance, Alexa is still faster. It's more consistent, and it's faster to do things like set timers. It's faster to return knowledge. It's faster to begin music playback. Music playback is an area that I had problems with Siri because I would do things like, hey thing, play so and so, and it would say, okay, playing from Apple Music. And so the speed that it would recognize what I wanted and would give me a response playing so and so from Apple Music, that speed matched Alexa in almost every case. Alexa was a little bit faster sometimes, but it usually matched it. But then Apple Music would take 20 seconds to actually start playing the track. So it would say, okay, playing Weezer or whatever, and then 20 seconds of silence, and then it would start playing. And this is just one example of many, and that isn't typical, but what is typical is random weird failures of Apple Music. And so I don't know if that's Siri, I don't know if that's Apple Music, probably some of both if I had to guess, but the actual Siri performance of giving me responses, listening, basic things like stop and pause and stuff, Siri was almost as fast or as fast as Alexa most of the time. And that is very impressive. That is not how it always was. The old HomePods were way slower, and those delays would be even longer. So that's good. The Alexa device was also extremely chatty with trying to upsell me things constantly.
Yep.
Everything you'd say, all right, here's the timer you set. By the way, it's like, shut up. Like, I don't care what else you can do. It always...
It's time for you to reorder that weirdly shaped pasta again.
Yeah, right.
Do you want me to add it to your cart? No.
By the way, did you know you can ask me to do so and so? It's like, I don't want to be, handheld through all of your new promotions, Alexa. Thank you, though. So yeah, overall, Siri is now fast enough. Whether it can stay consistently fast, that's the question. And HomePods I even had bugs with the stereo pairing still. HomePods have been around now for a long time. They've had stereo pairing since, I believe, like the third week they were out or something. It was very fast. So like, they've had stereo pairing for a number of years now. It should be fine. It's not. It's not rock solid. Even now with the new ones, the stereo pairing is not rock solid. Now, it's way better than the old ones so far, in my limited time with them so far, but that could change over time. We'll see. I'll tell you how that goes. But I would still have bugs like one of them would occasionally just drop out of the pair and rejoin it a few seconds later. So, one of them would be silent and then rejoin a few seconds later. Or when the song would change, like between tracks, only one of them would start playing the next song, and then the other one would jump in like 5 or 6 seconds in. And it's like, this is a brand new product based on a 5-year-old, 4.5-year-old product. Like, why? These products sound so good in stereo pairs. I wish they would fix these ridiculous software bugs that they still have with them. The performance papers over a lot of this. It is still now it recovers faster from those bugs than the old ones did. But the fact that they still have those bugs is really disheartening, because this is such a great product and you have them in stereo pairs and it should work better. What year is this?
Well, the reason it's so difficult for them to get it to work is kind of the same reason this happens with your AirPods. These are two independent little computers that have no idea, like they're manufactured separately. You buy them, they have no idea about each other until you introduce them to each other. And you have to say, hey, there's another one over there. You two coordinate with this third-party source of audio, or maybe just with each other, to make sure that you are both playing and are both in sync. And we've all heard the AirPods where you put them in your ear and one starts playing the music before the other ones. AirPods are also tiny little computers that coordinate with each other to get in sync, so they're going to play the audio. It's kind of a little miracle that they work at all.
They're also buggy as hell, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, my AirPods Pro also incredibly buggy in that way.
Right, but because it's a hard it's a split brain scenario, to use like server-side thing. So you have the two separate little brains that have to coordinate. This is a problem that is avoided if you have a central brain that then sends sound to the speakers that reproduce it, like in a traditional receiver with passive speaker setups. Now, I don't think you want HomePods to be passive speakers, and for people, we've always been asking, why don't they just put audio inputs on them? I think it's not quite that simple because of the processing that goes on in the HomePods. That in the end, even if you had a central brain, still with the processing, if the brain was in the individual speakers, you'd have to move the brains into the central thing as well. But it's like inherent in their design that you can just have one of these and it's got all the brains and all the amplification or whatever, that when you get two of them, it is really trying to get two things to be synchronized down to seconds. I mean, this is arguably the...
Well, hold on, though, because I can plug a turntable into my Sonos setup.
I was about to say Sonos.
And it will play perfectly synchronized no matter where I put the speaker in my hand, the speakers in the porch, the speakers in the living room. It does not compute to me how they can be so perfectly synchronized.
Right. Oh, that's kind of arguably what the entire Sonos why does Sonos exist as a company? It's because they were dedicated to solving this very specific problem, and they solved it way before other people did, which is how do I make the audio come out of all the speakers at the same time, even when those speakers are independent little computers. There is I'm sure what they do structurally and architecturally is probably wildly different than what Apple does, if only because Sonos was created so long ago. And I do think they have more of the ability at least to have a central brain thing going on. But what I'm getting at with the Apple thing is I'm not excusing their bugs. I'm just saying that Apple has chosen to try to solve a harder problem because of the way they have architected this product. If they were more fully dedicated to the idea that we want to provide a premium audio experience with more than one speaker, right? They would choose to do something different architecturally, whether that's having the Apple TV contain all the brains and making the speakers more passive, or selling an Apple receiver, or even selling an Apple soundbar, where at least the soundbar is never going to miscoordinate between its right and its left speakers, right? So I feel for the people trying to solve this problem, but they've kind of brought it on themselves by deciding to. And I have to say, with the AirPods, it's more acceptable to me for the one AirPod to take a half second to see the other one. But for a set of expensive speakers that I want to be a stereo pair, I find that much less acceptable. They should never do that. They should never. It's like, I almost wish they had a mode where it said, look, nobody gets to make any sound until you're sure the other one is in lockstep with you. Just wait. And that would just make them even slower, which you'd complain about that, right? But anyway, I feel like this is a big Sonos advantage, and it is a big advantage for dumbass speaker wire going to dumbass speakers from a central receiver, where you will never have this problem.
Yeah, that's entirely right. You would think, like, for these devices that are, hardwired to power, they always have power, they're stationary, and they're usually not very far from each other. Like, you would think that this would be better. AirPods are a much harder problem because they have your head in the way in the middle between the two of them, and your head's full of water and it blocks RF.
And you're taking them out of the case, and before they were like off.
Yeah, like they're so, like, the AirPods are in a much more high needs, demanding situation for this kind of coordination. Whereas the HomePods, you're just sitting on a counter, it plugged in, like always connected to Wi-Fi. Like, what's changing about this environment that they have to somehow drop out sometimes? Like, anyway, so the area of stereo pairing is still buggy and still needs work. But with that exception, everything else about this is an improvement. Even that is improved. It's just not correct yet, but it's still improved. Everything about this new HomePod is better. I am so happy they not only didn't screw it up, but actually made it even better. It sounds so much better, and I thought the old one sounded pretty good. So this is, again, a really great product. Not for every role, as mentioned earlier. Like, this is probably not your best home theater choice, but for the size that it is, and how simple and clean the setup is, and for all the different advantages it has in terms of things like not only the privacy angles mentioned earlier with your Amazon Police cylinders or your Google Creepy cylinders, you have this as a good option there, and to things like off-axis listening, where it truly is way better than everything else in its category. If you want something that is good looking enough to put in your kitchen counter, and maybe needs to be partner compatible for aesthetics, but also you want these different capabilities that it has, there is no other option on the market, or the other options are worse. So this is a great product. I am extremely happy with it so far. It's only been a couple of days, with that disclaimer. But I expect that this is going to be pretty good for a pretty long time. I hope.
I'm excited to receive my shipment of your old HomePods. What are you going to do with all them? You got a lot of those old ones. But I mean, it's granted some of them don't work anymore. But
yeah, I have 4, 2 of which work okay, 2 of which work less okay. So I was thinking of maybe I might upgrade one of the small rooms in my house to a full size HomePod, or maybe I'll set up the 2 old ones as TV speakers to our downstairs kind of secondary TV. Although that's usually used for video games, that would probably be bad. But
you should do that so you can tell us how good speaking of stereo pairing and flakiness, what is the reliability like on that setup?
Yeah, I mean, we don't use that TV that often. So, and when it is used, it's almost always for gaming. So this is not what these are good at.
Someone was saying there was a latency related bug that they supposedly fixed in 16.3 or something. But yeah, I think that for things that are really latency sensitive, you really kind of it helps to have the thing that I went through for all the struggles I went through to get my sync up. I had a central box that was controlling it all, including the video. And so, you've got the input lag of your TV, which you're at the mercy of, and there's not much you can do there except for go into game mode. But if you want something to align the audio latency to match the video, it helps to have sort of one traffic cop in the middle there. And you don't have that with these 2 HomePods just hanging off the end of your TV.
Yeah. And as mentioned earlier, for gaming, you really want dumbass wires going to dumbass speakers. That's what you want. When you want to minimize latency, you want wires. Simple as that. So anyway, thumbs up on the HomePod 2, and I'm really happy it's here.
So is there anything that you feel is worse or degraded as compared to the last one? Because this sounds like it was a freaking home run.
With the exception of there being less bass at high volume. That's the one thing that seemed like a regression. But again, it's at low to medium volumes, it's fine, and all the other aspects of the sound are significantly improved. So I'm willing to take that loss.
No, that's awesome. I'm super impressed.
We are brought to you this week by Kolide. You know the old saying, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail? Well, the traditional approach to device security is that hammer, a blunt instrument that can't solve nuanced problems. Even after installing clunky security agents that users hate, IT teams still have to deal with mountains of support tickets over the same old issues over and over again, and they have no way to address tricky things like unencrypted SSH keys, OS updates, or pretty much anything on a Linux device. Kolide is an endpoint security solution that's more like a Swiss Army knife. It gives IT teams a single dashboard for all devices, Mac, Windows, and yes, even Linux. You can query your entire fleet to check for common compliance issues or write your own custom checks. And instead of installing intrusive software that creates more work for IT, Kollide's lightweight agent shows end users how to fix issues themselves. You can achieve endpoint compliance by adding a new tool to your toolbox. Visit kolide.com/ATP to find out how. That's Kolide, spelled Kolide, kolide.com/ATP. Thank you so much to Kolide for sponsoring our show.
All right, let's do some Ask ATP. Gavin Whitaker writes, do you think large enterprises will ever set up Mastodon instances, and would there be business opportunities in doing so? Or would it be too much hassle to manage, like you have previously discussed? I noticed recently that a couple of our mutual friends, this is Jason Snell, Stephen Hackett, Mike Hurley, have all been setting up their own bespoke Mastodon instances, I think using, masto.host, if I'm not mistaken, which is something, it's less than $10 a month if you want to do a very, very small instance. Not a sponsor, maybe should be. But anyways, they've been doing that, and that, I think, makes some amount of sense perhaps for organizations, but I don't think most organizations are going to care about Mastodon enough to have a presence, to be honest with you. I would be very surprised if most corporations are going to care. And if they did, I presume there would be some particular instance that would try to cater to those sorts of clients. But yeah, I don't see this happening.
I think if Mastodon ever gets enough critical mass that companies care that it exists, which, is not implausible, but hasn't yet happened. I think that the Washington Post is verifying their reporters' profiles, at least on Mastodon, so they get the green check mark, right? So there's some kind of awareness. But anyway, if Mastodon ever grows to the point where big companies want to be on it, I think the big companies will run their own instances, just because the lesson they will have learned by this whole thing of we got to deal with this again. Why can't we just be on Twitter? Because again, if Mastodon gains some kind of critical mass, it means things continue to go crappily over at Twitter, and they're going to feel burned by that. And if they feel burned by that, someone in the company will say, the only silver lining to this hassle that we now have to deal with is that on Mastodon, we don't have to have a repeat of the scenario where we invested all this time and effort into this thing. Lots of these companies have their only customer support is through Twitter, which is a company they don't control, right? So now they're going to be paying for API access and everything for their automated system to be able to talk to, and they're going to be cranky about that. And, obviously it takes technical expertise and costs money to run an instance, but big corporations like to control stuff. That's why big corporations will like to control their own IT, maybe their own, email thing. That's why Microsoft makes money. Let people run Exchange in-house instead of outsourcing it to Google's business thing, because they're we got to control it all ourselves. So I think if Mastodon becomes popular, big companies will run their own Mastodon instances, and they'll like it. They will want to run it because they're we controlled it just for our stuff. No one can ever kick us off. No one can ever, they could be defederated if they just do something super terrible. But in general, I think they will want to run their instances not to be at the mercy of people like Elon Musk.
Nathan Roberts writes, I am always hearing how iOS developers have to re-download Xcode when Apple announces new features. I don't fully understand how you need to download the entire IDE rather than a set of updates to support new features. For those of us who are more familiar with IDEs like Visual Studio Code and IntelliJ, can you elaborate on the integration between Xcode and developing for Apple platforms? Who would like to handle this?
So this is an instance where Apple could provide incremental updates to Xcode, but they do not. Right? So macOS has for most of its history, the ability to do incremental updates. You don't have to re-download the entire OS. At various times, you'd need to re-download way more than you thought you should for the update size that they give you. But in general, over the years, there's been various systems to send less than the entire operating system every single time. And macOS is way more complicated than Xcode, right? So they could do that.
Is it? Yeah, Modern Xcode is pretty complicated.
No, but the OS is the OS is way bigger, right? But they don't do that. Why don't they do it? This is not important enough to do it. Like the number of developers versus the number of Mac users is a small fraction. The download size used to be reasonable, although now it's like 8 gigs or whatever. But still, it's like whatever. It's just easier to make one artifact, as they say, one thing that's the same for everybody. You don't have to worry about your updater going weird or whatever. They even got to the point where, everything is packaged in the thing, and the first time you launch it, it says, do you want to install these SDKs? And then it does all the stuff where it does, whatever it needs to do, like one thing that's one chunk. So the answer is yes, they could do incremental updates. It would be less download time, but Apple doesn't because it's simpler and more straightforward. And honestly, of all the things that are annoying about Apple's development, having to download Xcode and waiting for it to XIP, unzip, takes a long time. Maybe that encourages developers to buy faster Macs. I don't know. But in the grand scheme of the thing, it's not a big deal, right? Just don't do it through the Mac App Store because you'll be sad.
Yeah, that's the thing. The Mac App Store does do Delta updates, but Xcode is such a large app with so many files in it.
Does it do Delta updates to Xcode?
I mean, the Mac App Store, I think it does in general, but because Xcode is so big, it doesn't matter. Like it ends up being slower than it would be to just download the whole thing.
And it's not because of the size, because 8 gigs is big. It's because of the number of files. Like just go, do a find command on the Xcode.app and see how many files are in there. It's ridiculous.
Oh my god! So it's like whenever you have to empty your recycle bin or your trash, excuse me. I forgot what platform I was on there for a second. Whenever you have to empty your trash and there's a version of Xcode in there, it takes forever because there's so many files in that bundle.
I'm counting the files right now. That's how long it's taking on on an SSD here. I'm just watching the command. It's waiting. I'm waiting. I'll chime in when it tells you.
Yeah.
All right, and Darren Kelkoff writes, I'm fairly new to iOS and macOS development. One thing I've struggled with is when I want to search the web for how to do a certain something in code for an app, that I'm not sure exactly the best way to tweak my search terms to get hits relevant to a developer rather than an iOS or Mac user. For example, if I wanted to add code to an iOS app to automatically run an iOS shortcut, if I search for, quote, iOS launch a shortcut, quote, the results are all about how to run shortcuts as an end user. The best strategy I've used to date has been to add the term Swift to my search terms, but I was wondering if you guys had any recommendations or successful experiences to share. That's my trick, is add Swift. But Marco, as the old hat of the three of us, what's the right answer?
Okay, before he goes, I've got the number of files. Without cheating, you want to do Price is Right rules. What are your two guesses?
I'll say 1 million.
Oh, God, come on now. $1.
Price is Right rules,
$1. $1.
You're gonna go one?
No, all kidding aside, if I were to, I know to do Price is Right rules, I would guess one file, but I think it's something to the order of 5,000 to 7,000 files, somewhere in that neck of the woods.
Yeah. So your guess is 5,000 to 7,000. Marcos is 1 million. Do you want to converse with each other to figure out why you're this far apart and maybe think about which one of you is closer to right? Or
yeah, I'm closer to right. Marco's bananas.
Because it includes all the headers and all the SDK files. That's where I think so many of the files are. All the different device support. It's there's so much. We're talking multiple OSs, multiple versions of those OSs, oftentimes being bundled. It's a massive, massive thing.
So I feel like if we weren't playing by Price is Right rules, I feel like Marco should win because at least he understands the scale of the problem. 5,000 files, Casey. I think Switchglass has more than has nothing.
No way.
Are you kidding? 5,000
No,
files?
shoot. I'm thinking, no, because what I was thinking of is when I empty the trash, and no, it is in the tens of thousands, isn't it? I don't think it's anywhere near 1 million, though.
So anyway, the answer from the current version of Xcode, this is on an Intel Mac in case it's different, is 398,311
Oh,
files.
that was way more than I thought.
So
Way,
I
way
was
more.
not that ridiculous. And because
It's
especially like
400,000 and Marco pretty much doubled it, which is, in the ballpark.
I
But
was
5,000, no.
fewer orders of magnitude away than Casey was.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I got to pay attention next time I empty the trash, because that's what I was thinking of is when I empty the trash after an Xcode update, how many files does it say it has to delete? And I think it, well, maybe I'm wrong. I must be wrong if it's really hundreds of thousands, but I thought it was somewhere between like 10 and 30,000 files when I empty the trash. But I'll try to pay attention.
Well,
next
anyway,
time.
I just counted them. And by the way, SwitchGlass has 23 files. So sorry, SwitchGlass, for saying bad things about you.
I was going to say, how did you get that? There's no NPM in there.
And keep in mind also, like, the whole, like, developer or, library developer folder, there's different places that it puts files once you actually use it to do anything. So it isn't just the files in the bundle that it's also dealing with. Like, there's also then all the, the device support and all that crap that gets spewed all over your disk.
Does it spew symlinks these days? I never watched what it's actually doing these days. It used to be way more complicated, but now it's all in the bundle, and then it does the quote unquote installation stuff. I thought it might have just been a bunch of symlinks that it sets up, but maybe it does spray files too.
I don't know. Anyway, so to answer Darren's question about how to search for things, there's two tricks here. Number one is if it's more like generic words you have to search for, you can always go to Stack Overflow. That and site:/stackoverflow.com. Like that's where most of the good answers for stuff like that are anyway, with the exception of there's also sites like Hacking with Swift that have really good Swift tutorials and certain examples and things like that. So like there is some stuff out in the general web that's good, but if you're really having trouble finding things and you're kind of name colliding with common words, oftentimes restricting the search to stackoverflow.com is oftentimes better. The other thing is if you search for an API name in particular, usually you're good. And so oftentimes to find that API name, that might take a little bit of searching. But one thing I would try to do is search the Apple Developer app because the documentation, of course, the Apple documentation. Because then you'll at least hit upon a WWDC talk or a code example or a documentation example. You'll at least hit upon something that will tell you the name of the API. And then you can search for the name of the API specifically on the web, and that will cut out almost all of that other stuff. So that's the real answer.
Oh, that'll cut out all the other stuff if you're lucky. Back in the old days with name prefixes, you'd have NS in front of things, or you'd have CF or something like that. But now with Swift, where the thing is called Vue and stuff like that, then you have to add whatever proper nouns you can find. So add Swift UI, no space after the T and before the U. Swift UI, all one word, instead of just adding Swift. I found sometimes you can also throw in Xcode. What you're trying to look for is words that you think will come up in close proximity to that, like conceptually, that someone might mention Xcode in their question, especially if they're a novice and don't know the name of a thing or whatever. If you're lucky enough to come up with an NS or a UI, a UI table view, NS string, NS, like that will definitely get you. What you want to do is you want to weed out the non-dev answers, because as the problem is you end up with all these people putting questions that have nothing to do with development, have to do with using your Mac, and you don't want to see those. And if you have a word overlap with them, it's very difficult. But if you throw in the word Xcode, no one's going to mention that in their question about iOS shortcuts unless, they're actually developing it now. The problem is most developers, experienced developers, are not going to mention Xcode in their question probably. So yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, but domain-specific searches, and even just doing stuff like Apple has dev forums, right? If you're on that thing where you're like, I don't even know what word to search for yet, if you limit your search to the dev forums, either by using a Google site :search or by using the dev forum's own search, I don't know if it has one, but I assume it does somewhere, then that will let you find the proper nouns, and then you go back to the bigger Google and throw in the proper nouns.
Thanks to our sponsors this week, Drafts, Pushcut, and Kolide. And thanks to our members who support us directly. You can join atp.fm/join, and we will talk to you next week.
Now the show is over, they didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research, Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, EYLISS, so that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse, it's accidental. They didn't mean to, accidental. Tech podcast so long.
So did your family listen to the cavalcade of fuzzy cylinders as well, or were they just like ignoring you while you were there playing mad scientist and making the house noisy?
They were not a fan of this test, and so I did it while Tiff was working in the basement and Adam was at school.
Because I was wondering if they had opinions about old versus new, or did none of them really care and they just want you to get this over with and get it back to just having a normal kitchen where you can play music?
Definitely the latter.
All right.
I will occasionally ask, like, Tiff is usually pretty amenable to like, hey, try these headphones. What do you think? Something like that. But this was a larger scale thing that nobody in the house cares as much as I do. They just want things to work and be good and fast.
She took your AirPods Max though, right? Aren't they like her favorite headphones now?
Yeah, she wears them much of the day when she's working up here because they're very comfortable on her, and that's great. I mean, and I even went. I figured the AirPods Max have been out for almost 2 years now, and so I figured surely somebody has made a wide array of third-party magnetically attaching ear pads that can go on them instead of the stock ones.
That was the part that was uncomfortable to you? Because I tried them on. I try them on whenever I'm in an Apple store just hanging out, and I find the headband to be the thing that's objectionable to me.
So it isn't that the headband was pressing against my head. It was the AirPods Max, as we discussed at great length when they came out, and I kind of reviewed them on the show, whenever that was 2 years ago. Their main problems are weight. They're very heavy, and that makes it hard to make it comfortable for headphones. It's not impossible, but it is harder. And that their ear pads, like the contact area that the ear pads touched your head, was almost too narrow of a rim. And so it wasn't spreading that weight across a very wide area. So it was like digging in almost to your head. And I find them to be okay for a few minutes. But then if I wear them for say a whole morning, I'll take them off and be like, I'll have a headache and my head will hurt the rest of the day. It's like you don't realize how uncomfortable they are until you take them off after a while. Then you're like, oh no, I feel terrible.
And Tiff doesn't have that problem when she wears them?
No, many people don't have that problem. But it's just, whatever it is, they're not comfortable on me. And apparently you for different reasons.
Because I was wearing them for 30 seconds in the Apple store and I was like, hell no on this headband. Cannot handle it.
I know. It's a shame because they sound amazing. But I even tried, I found finally there was one company I found on all the internet, one company on Amazon that I found that had third-party ear pads for them, and they are softer, but they look almost like they were made to look almost the same. So they aren't wider. They don't have there's so many great aftermarket third-party ear pads for most regular headphones. Like Brainwaves is a popular brand of them. There's these companies that make aftermarket ear pads, and they're big and plush, and they're really nice. And if you have a pair of headphones that isn't very comfortable, I suggest you try one of these ear pad things that you can get them on Amazon for $25-$30. They're oftentimes much more comfortable and much more plush and everything like that. And for AirPods Max, that just seemed not to exist. And so I did find this one company that made this one, and it was a little more comfortable, but it wasn't enough to make a difference. It was more comfortable, but it was still very uncomfortable after a long time. So it's a shame. I wish those fit me, but they just don't.
And speaking of third-party things for Apple products, when you got the shorter power cords, did you find ones that are color matched and nice and pliable? I would like to see the setup of your when you again get everything off your counters again and just set it up the way you want it. Did you find a nice cord that just is long enough to reach your outlets and isn't stiff and weird or the wrong color? I
found basic white, lamp cord looking kind of ones. So, the basic, 2-conductor, standard, white plug that comes straight out. I was hoping to get a right angle plug at least so I could make it a little more flush against the wall, but I just did a quick Amazon search during last episode and just, ordered it after the show. But they're fine. It was $10 on Amazon for a 2-pack. It's fine. I have 1-foot cables now, because you can see from the picture, they're right next to the outlets. I don't need a whole bunch of extra cable, and it was totally fine to just pop out the stock cables, pop these in. It doesn't look as nice because they aren't, braided. And they have like the regular cheap, lamp plug ends.
Are they kinked from how they were wrapped when they were packaged?
No, they're only 1 foot cables. They're too short to have those problems, and they're flexible and it's fine. It isn't like pushing them out from the wall or anything, so it's fine.
Speaking of that, I went down this little rabbit hole briefly and never actually ordered anything. I should revisit it. All of my speakers are connected with just plain old speaker wire, and
that's all you need.
Well, there's lots of different ways that you can connect speaker wire to a speaker. And the way I have done it is the laziest way, which is you just strip off a little bit of the insulation and then you twist the wire so it's a little stiff little thing, and then you I forget what it's called. There's a name for it, but someone in the chat room will say it in 2 seconds. But there's like a post with a hole through it, and you shove the wire through the hole, and then you screw down
a binding post.
Yeah, and then you screw down the little thing, and then it cinches, and it's fine. It works fine. But the problem is, it is like put the wire through a hole, and you screw a thing. It's in there, right? It's you're pressing the conductor against the little metal thing with the screw thing, right? And that sounds fine, except for the fact the back of my receiver has lots of those things plugged into it, because you've got all the speakers going there, and each of them have 2 conductors, and they all go to the back of the receiver, and all of them are screwed into these little posts, and those wires are all routed all around the room and then behind the TV and into the thing. And it's such a pain in the butt to I don't have enough slack to pull the whole receiver out of the entertainment center, but you have to pull it out enough to be able to get to the wires, and God forbid you have to turn the thing around, and it's just so another solution that would solve this is that's supported by lots of different receivers and speakers, including my receiver and my speakers, is what they call a banana plug, which is an actual plug that plugs into and out of that thing that you screw down. I don't know if banana plugs are considered to be worse or better or whatever. All I know is that I don't have them, and I wish I did. But then I started looking into that.
You can easily convert them.
Yeah, no, you totally can. These are banana plug ready. All I'd have to do is buy some little banana plug ends. You just buy these things; they're pretty cheap, and you take your speaker wires out. You probably cut them and strip them again, or whatever, and then you put them into
screw them in.
Yep. And then you're all set. But there's 17 different ways to do that, and there's lots of very strong opinions about which ones are and aren't good, and which ones are going to corrode, and which ones are going to do this. Because it's audio, and I'm like, how much of this is real, and how much of this is people?
I can tell you, I've used these before. None of that matters at all, because the great thing about speaker wire, there's all the audio files, the high end audio, shops and blogs and magazines. They will tell you how much cabling matters, and it really, really doesn't. You could unbend a coat hanger and run it to power your speakers, and it would sound just as good as the $5,000 a foot, gold infused, never seen air. It's just there's so much ridiculousness in speaker cables.
I'm not worried about the electrical conductivity. I'm worried about physically speaking, because it's stranded wire. My speaker wire is stranded. It's not a coat hanger. It's a solid conductor.
Yep.
I'm worried about that stranded wire being crimped in some weird thing and then eventually just cracking off, and just my speaker wire going bink and then no longer being connected because I put it into the banana plug and screwed it down too hard or something. So anyway, I haven't gotten around to it.
It's way easier than you think it is. It's really not a problem. It's very idiot-proof. Lots of idiots do it, and they're fine. Keep in mind with speaker wire, typically speakers are stationary. And so any crazy way you might hook up the wire, it's not going to be under a lot of stress because it's not moving and flexing.
Well, but it's not the speaker end that I'm worried about. It's the receiver end. I wouldn't put banana plugs on the speakers because who cares? They're fine. I can see them. I can get to the back of the speakers real easily, right? It's the stupid receiver. And the part of the thing that's keeping me from doing it is if I get banana plugs, now I have to get to the back of the receiver again. And this time, when I initially do it, there's no banana plugs on it now. So I got to do the whole thing of finding a way to pull the stuff through and rotating the thing sideways and my stupid glass shelves that are on. When you try to rotate the receiver, the glass shelves go off the little nubbins that it's supposed to be on, and it crashes down. It's just, it annoys me so much. Every time I see someone who has an AV setup where they can just walk behind their equipment, I'm like, oh my God, how much I would love to have that. Can you imagine just walking behind your equipment and being able to get access to all the back panels? I do not have that luxury. It's jammed into a corner that's really hard to get to, and it's such a mess. So then every time I think about the banana plugs, I just look at my setup. I'm like, well, it's working now. Just don't touch it. But if I ever have to go back there again, I'm going to order a mess of banana plugs probably and just get back. And the reason the banana plugs will help is then I can just yank the freaking receiver out and the banana plugs will go pop, pop, pop out. Who cares? I'll pop them back in when it goes back in.
That's not, they don't work the way you think. So there's two things.
They're not that easy to get out?
Number one, banana plugs are huge. So they actually might not like they're way bigger than you think from pictures.
Oh, I have plenty of room behind it. They're not going to hit into anything.
Okay. And then number 2, they hold on really tightly in the sockets because they have like little like springy ends that kind of get compressed, and so they're.
Oh yeah, no, that's the banana part of it.
Yeah, so they don't pop out easily. You got to give them a good yank. And so I don't think this is going to do what you think it is, and I don't think it's going to save as much.
I mean, maybe I just reach behind there and pop them out, because here's the thing: if you don't have enough slack to like get them in or out, that means you have to thread. You know what I just said? It's threading it through a hole in a post and then screwing a plastic thing down. If you ever look at the back of the receiver, there's like a dozen of those right next to each other. So imagine trying to like lay on the ground and shove your body into the AV cabinet and crane your head around with a light on your forehead so that you can shove in the middle wire of the center channel speaker between 17 other ones, like with very little slack, shove it through a hole in the little post that's in the middle of that, and then screw the thing down. And it's so hard to do. It is just like I need like a what do you call it? Endoscopy equipment, like the surgeons use with like a fiber optic cable and a little thing, because it is not fit for humans. And I guess the solution would be just put 7 feet of slack on all your speaker wires, but that ship has sailed, because I made a mistake when I laid out all the speaker wire, and I do not have enough slack at the receiver end. And I don't want to run all the wire again.
I'd forgotten that, like, you have 1 billion speakers and I only have 2, so it's different. You're dealing with a different degree of complexity here. So yeah, I'd say go ahead and get them. They're very easy. The great thing about speaker wire, again, like speaker wire is so dumb, and it is so tolerant of mistakes or sloppy work. Like, literally, as long as the like positive and negative wires aren't touching each other and you're not shorting it out, you're fine. Like, anything else you do, it's fine. You can use regular lamp cord. You can use, like, you don't have to get fancy cable. You don't have, like, if a few little strands break off on one of your ends, you don't have the full number of strands to shove into the hole. It's fine. Doesn't matter. It's so easy. You can do pretty much whatever you want and be as sloppy as you need to be. And again, as long as you're not shorting it out, it's fine.
Were we doing ATP when the mouse chewed through my speaker cable? Do you remember that? Might have been before we started the show.
I don't remember that.
I don't think so.
I was like, shortly after I had first set up speaker wire in my house. Maybe it was after I just moved in. We had a mouse problem. Chewed right through the speaker wire.
Oh, I'd be so mad.
That's bad. I don't know. It chewed through one of the conductors of the speaker wire. It was like a clean surgical cut. Like, you saw a speaker wire with the 2 little conductors, and all of a sudden one of the conductors just stopped, and it was like a 3-inch gap where there was none of that wire, and then it started again. I was like, well, that would explain why the speaker. And speaking of the different things, we just had recently the thing where my tweeter stopped working on my standard channel, and I couldn't figure out what was going wrong, and I eventually figured it out. It's real important to have all those different cone sizes, because if you're missing one, you notice.